सलाम ख़वातीन और हज़रात, वेलकम बैक टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ थॉट बिहाइंड थिंग्स। आज हमारे साथ एक बहुत ही ख़ास मेहमान मौजूद हैं। वैसे तो आपको पता है कि हमारी सीरीज़ चल रही है आजकल विद एंडेवर पाकिस्तान, वेयर वी ट्राइंग टू लुक फॉर द 50 मोस्ट एक्साइटिंग स्टार्टअप्स स्लैश बिजनेसेस इन पाकिस्तान, पर्टिकुलरली स्टार्टअप्स। उसमें मैं बहुत इंटरेस्टेड हूँ क्योंकि आपको पता है मेरे ओपिनियंस बहुत सारे वेरीड रहे हैं इसके अंदर। लेकिन पिछले 2 साल के अंदर जो डाउन टर्न आया था 2022 के बाद, उसमें जो बहुत सारे ऐसे स्टार्टअप्स थे जिनकी बिजनेस मॉडलिंग आउट थी, जिनका कोर फंडामेंटल जो एक यूनिट इकोनॉमिक्स है वो आउट थी, वो काफ़ी हद तक या तो डिसरप्ट हो चुके हैं, छोड़ के चले गए हैं, या दे हैड टू पिवट एंड कन्वर्ट देमसेल्व्स इनटू बेटर बिजनेस मॉडल्स, व्हिच इज़ वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई इस वक्त जो अब स्टार्टअप्स ना सिर्फ सर्वाइव कर रहे हैं बल्कि थ्राइव कर रहे हैं. सो आई एम क्यूरियस टू सी के व्हाट्स देयर मॉडल, हाउ आर दे ग्रोइंग, एंड देन पर्टिकुलरली आने वाले वक्त में वो किस तरीके से अपने आप को इवॉल्व कर रहे हैं. एक ऐसा स्टार्टअप है जो कि तकरीबन आज से 2-3 साल पहले आई वुड से आई हर्ड अबाउट. आई थिंक दे started in 2020, so that's been 5 years. But 2-3 साल पहले I found out about them, and the reason why I did was, I think Stripe invested in them. मुझे exact details नहीं पता. We'll know more about that soon. But Stripe invested in them, and they were essentially positioning themselves as the Stripe of Pakistan, which again, in my opinion, is absolutely phenomenal. I've used Stripe in Dubai. It has absolutely changed the way that I do business. I think about business, particularly जो लोग services की domain में काम कर रहे हैं उनके लिए there's a lot of opportunity there to streamline their business and create a lot of opportunities. But nonetheless, आज we have with us the founder and CEO of Safepay, Ziyad Parekh.
This episode of Thought Behind Things is presented in partnership with Endeavor Pakistan.
So thank you so much for taking the time out and coming to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start this conversation just trying to sort of understand you before we get to Safepay and the startup side of things. I want to know, where were you born? Early life aapne kahan pe guzari? And what were some of the themes growing up that made you the sort of person that you are today?
Sure. Born and raised in Karachi, all through high school. And then I went abroad for my studies. But while I was in Karachi, I had a very, I guess I would say like a traditional upbringing in terms of from a family perspective. My parents, especially my mom, emphasize a lot on studies. So, us hawale se, from some respects, I was a good student. Alhamdulillah, excelled in school where it mattered, and I was good in sports as well. So, trying to always, be an all-rounder, trying to touch all aspects that I could, and eventually, I think it all paid out. I was able to use that, build a good resume, and apply to college, etc. But growing up, it was just me. So we have a small family. It's just me and my sister and my parents. But cousins were very close always. They're like my brothers and sisters. So from that perspective, it never felt like a small family. I always used to live with my grandparents. So Dada, Dadi were always close by. Nana, Nani also. So it was a very kind of nice childhood, I would say. And a lot of things I miss now that everyone's sort of now grown up and married and has kids, and they've all kind of moved in different places, some to different countries. So I miss those times. But yeah, it was a great upbringing, alhamdulillah, and I'm very grateful for it.
Nice. Tell me about Karachi growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I mean, there was a lot of war on terror, beyond war on terror as well. Karachi की अपनी gang violence भी थी, और law and order was not the very best. How much of that was an integral part of your life? Or were you were you generally a sheltered person, a sheltered kid, or did you go around and about and not really think about कि यार शहर में ही सारा कुछ हो रहा है, ठीक है, whatever?
No, I think my parents actually sheltered or tried to shelter us as much as possible. We were young from a certain extent, so we didn't really grasp the full aspect of what was going on in Karachi. हमें ज़्यादा उस वक्त समझ में नहीं आ रहा था, but we could feel it that there was tension. News में हमें नजर आती थी, and there was always some disturbance, and especially in Karachi in the 90s, like you mentioned, it was kind of a dangerous time. But as we grew older, those things became more apparent and real for us. So I remember when we were in the college section in Grammar, which is the new Clifton campus that they opened up, now a decade ago. They had a few security issues. Someone tried to jump over the wall and ये and वो ऐसा कुछ. So फिर वो barbed wire उन्होंने लगाया दीवारों पर. And then, we started to realize that, this security thing is really something that's real. And then during I think it was either my second year or first year, O levels ke, when the attack on Benazir Bhutto's convoy on Shah Faisal happened, and I think that's when there was a lot of chaos on the streets, right? Like people were literally displaced. If for instance, my mom, she was at my nani's house, she couldn't come home that night, and generally I think there was a lot of chaos that night, a lot of violence. And that's when I think for me it was an eye-opening moment. And I actually wrote my college essay on how that impacted not only the city but myself, and how generally, as you said, we were sheltered. How that bubble that we were living in sort of burst because of some event like that, and it made us realize that not everything was as hunky-dory as it seemed in our little bubble, and there was actually people struggling outside, and there was a lot of just chaos, violence, etc., that could disrupt anyone's life in a second. And so I kind of focused my college essay around that, and I think, like you mentioned, those were one of the moments that really kind of affected me personally.
Interesting. Did you used to travel a lot before going for college, either Middle East, elsewhere?
Alhamdulillah, yeah. Like my parents always tried to take us at least once a year somewhere abroad. That usually was, like you meant, Dubai, because my chacha actually, he lived in Dubai. So my cousins, my first cousins used to live in Dubai. So whenever we got the chance in the summer or the winter, we would go try and see them. And then, yeah, my dad would try and take us on some family vacation at least once a year. So alhamdulillah, I've traveled Far East, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, etc., Hong Kong, and then also in the West to Europe and the US and Canada. So growing up, yeah, I had a fair bit of exposure to countries outside Pakistan as well.
I think जो मेरे लिए interesting चीज़ है ना वो ये है कि you were with KGS upbringing, with generally a sheltered lifestyle, growing up in the years that you did. I think post 90s, overall, even 2000s, probably is the worst time in Karachi, right? So from sectarian violence, gang violence, political violence, terrorism-driven violence, the city was just crumbling down. And so obviously एक तो आपका वो बबल है जो कि बड़ा क्लोज टू होम है, जिसकी वजह से आपको एकदम से सडनली होता है कि यार, ओ माय गॉड, आई एम नॉट इवन सेफ इन wherever I am. But beyond that as well, as you travel around, you're able to then contextualize कि यार दुनिया किधर है और मैं किधर हूँ. And कराची के लिए I found it to be very curious. आप लाहौर जाते हैं ना, लाहौर में there's a lot of disparity. But अगर आप अपने बबल में फिरते रहें तो आपको वो डिस्पैरिटी नज़र नहीं आती है. आपको उन्होंने खूबसूरत ब्रिज बना दिया है कि ब्रिज के नीचे आपको नहीं नज़र आ रहा क्या चल रहा है. आप इलाके से इलाके घूमते रहें और आप कहेंगे यार वाह क्या इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, इट्स इनक्रेडिबल. एंड डिपेंडिंग ऑन के आपके पास कितना पैसा है और किस लेवल ऑफ बबल में आपने जाना है, तो देयर इज़ एन अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर एनी एंड एवरी वन. एंड you get everything from the bike to the Ferrari, and you can live the luxury that you dream of. Karachi I found curious because Karachi में बहुत पैसा है और बहुत पैसे वाले लोग हैं. But even the most elitist places are just so terrible that it boggles your mind कि आप DHA जाते हैं और वहाँ पर आपको पानी नहीं अवेलेबल होता और फ्लड्स आ जाते हैं. आप NHS जाते हैं. I remember I went to a good friend of mine lives there, तो मैं रेगुलरली वहाँ पे जाता रहा हूँ और वो बड़ी एक्सपेंसिव प्रॉपर्टीज, ही वुड टेल मी कि दिस इज़ जो गेटेड जमजमा वाली है, दिस इज़ द मोस्ट एक्सपेंसिव प्रॉपर्टी इन कराची, और रियली हार्टलैंड के अंदर है और सारा कुछ है। यार गली के बाहर कूड़ा पड़ा हुआ है, फंडामेंटल्स ही नहीं सॉर्टेड। एंड सो एज यू ग्रो अप, आइदर, एंड मोस्ट पीपल जो मैंने वहाँ पे कराची में देखे हैं, आइदर यू हैव पीपल हु आर स्टक इन ए सॉर्ट ऑफ ए लोअर मिडिल इनकम साइकिल, तो वो बड़े शहरों में जैसे होता है, न्यूयॉर्क में लोग फंसे रहते हैं, लंदन में लोग फंसे रहते हैं, तो वो उसमें फंसे हुए हैं। और यू हैव अ लॉट ऑफ बिजनेस ग्रुप्स विद बिजनेस इंटरेस्ट्स जो कि कराची में रहते हैं, बिकॉज इम्पोर्ट एक्सपोर्ट का काम है, ट्रेडिंग का काम है, they have the exposure, they understand there are a lot of problems, but for them, Karachi is lifeline, and they choose to remain there. I'm curious about your thought process, because you travel a lot. You eventually decided to go to a brand name school, phenomenal school, and you did stay in the US for a bit to work. Um, but then you decided to come back to Pakistan. What was going on in your mind where you said, okay, like, I have a great degree, I'm a great student, I'm working in the US, I have theoretically my career sorted out. वो US में इतना कोई complicated नहीं है, आपने एक certain direction follow करते रहनी है. American dream में upper middle income American बनना बहुत आसान है पाकिस्तानी Indians के लिए, right? And you mentioned earlier you have family that has moved abroad and have settled there as well. What brought you back to Pakistan?
So it's an interesting question. So for me, when I was in the US working a job or whatever, there was always something inside me that wasn't satisfied with where I was. There was an itch, khujli samajh lein, that I wanted to continue to explore, do something in a space that I was interested in. And because of what I studied in college, which wasn't computer science or software engineering, it was math and econ, I ended up doing a concentration in computer science because that's all I could do at the time. So I wanted to explore something at the intersection of finance and technology. And uske liye I wanted to try and make something for myself. Now the question of, and this comes back to basically my upbringing, growing up around my family, my dad, who was a businessman, his cousins come from a generation, I guess, of people who ended up starting their own businesses and doing that. So that was already kind of ingrained in me. And what I realized was that, I had spent about 18, 19 years of my life in Karachi in Pakistan, and those were the formidable years of my life and my upbringing, and those years shaped who I was as a person. So I owed a lot to Pakistan, and I owed a lot to Karachi and my community and the people over here. So for me, it was also about trying to do something in whatever capacity I could to try and give back. और जो मेरी strengths थी at the time, I was young, I was ambitious, I wanted to build something, and I wanted to build it for the people of Pakistan. Ab I just had to figure out what are the problems people are facing in Pakistan that I can solve. Like you mentioned, there are a lot of problems, and then I'm not suited to solve most of them, but there's some that I could solve. And I wanted to start something on my own. I didn't want to rely on family business mein jaake, you try and grow that and everything. I wanted to start from scratch and see how I could kind of take it on my own. So my parents, or my dad, obviously, financially, after I graduated, didn't support me. I was on my own. And I think that was very important for me to understand the value of, a job, of hard work. And America, like you said, it's very easy to follow a path, and if you follow that path, you'll make it, inshallah. But in the early days, when you get your first job or second job out of college, you're also fighting with the most talented people from all over the world for the same job. So that work ethic and that discipline and that fear that you may lose a job and you may lose your life in the US really drives you. And that determination and that ambition got essentially ingrained in me in part of like the way I started to work, and I started to live my life. And I think for me, there was this, you can call it an ambition to apply to this program in the US called Y-Combinator. And Y-Combinator, as you probably know, is like this very prestigious startup accelerator based out of San Francisco in the US, and they've incubated some of the most successful companies in the world: Stripe, Dropbox, Airbnb, Coinbase, you name it, DoorDash. And for me, that was like a dream. कि मुझे एक दिन Y Combinator में accept होना है. And I just had to, see how I could manage a full-time job, all of its responsibilities, as well as trying to build something on the side that really resonated with not only with me and something that I was passionate about, but something that actually solved a real problem for Pakistan. So I had decided that. And I had decided this probably around like 2013, 2014 कि ये मुझे करना है. It took me about 6 years in my journey in the US to ultimately get Safepay off the ground, but it evolved over time. And I think that evolutionary process was also like very helpful in not only, making me a better person or increasing my skills in software engineering, and then ultimately being able to apply to YC and everything. But when I came back, or when I started Safepay for Pakistan, it was almost a no-brainer. I knew कि मुझे वापस आना है. I wanted to do something. My family was here. I wanted to come back and help my parents as well. And I really just wanted someone to care about, like someone from our generation, to really try and build some like things for Pakistan. Because our parents' generation did it from a business perspective, right? Industries, factories, like you mentioned, import, export, banks to a certain extent, but banks, I guess, were also in like the 70s. Uske baad, it kind of fizzled out, and we were
stagnated.
As a country, we were stagnant. Chalo, agriculture ho raha tha, commercial real estate and all of these
agriculture,
things.
I think mostly stagnated is na. Agriculture, you had one of the worst yields in the region. Commercial real estate was a pump and dump Vegas that was not really creating housing. It was creating a lot of great lottery. So I think it was stagnated for the longest time. Again, before we move to Safepay, I'd love to understand you a bit more. How was New York going from Karachi to one mega city to another mega city? Essentially the financial capital of Pakistan. So you go to the financial capital of the world. And I understand you always generally wanted to be in finance. What drove that interest? And how was New York? And इसमें मैं एक छोटा सा context ये ज़रूर add करूँगा. One of my best friends was always interested in finance. I feel like New York broke him because it looks fancy, it sounds fancy, but it's full of sharks. And either you're like that 1% of the people who end up there and are able to make it. Otherwise, midway कहीं ना कहीं वो आपका इतना aggressive हो जाता है कि आप कहते हैं कि यार, you know what, like maybe let's try something else. So I'm curious, how was the experience of New York for a kid who's grown up in Karachi?
From the outset, I think it was it was awesome to go to New York. So I spent 4 years at Cornell in my undergrad. Cornell is in upstate New York in a village. So chota sa gaon hai. Spent 4 years there. So I went from a big city of 18 million to a gaon of 1,000 people. And wahan se then when I moved to New York, it was like, okay, now I'm back in a city. And when you get to New York, and I'm sure a lot of people might agree with me, and you just see the skyline कि आप नीचे से आप ऊपर देख रहे हैं, and New York or Manhattan is is, I would say, 90% engineering and human marvel. कि उन्होंने एक छोटी सी ज़मीन में they've just erected these, skyscrapers, and there's no natural beauty, कोई इतने दरख्त नहीं है, and Central Park है चलो, but majority of it is just human engineering and human capital being put to work. And I think that was inspiring for me कि यार आपने ऐसा एक शहर एक खड़ा किया है that is now the financial center of the world. You have Wall Street there. There was this obviously Silicon Valley's in the West, but they had this Silicon Alley that was popping up in New York at the time. A lot of tech companies were shifting offices and doing things like that. But for me, I was 22, 23 out of college in New York. Didn't really know how rough and tough and fast-paced it was at the time, because I'd never lived there. I'd just come once before for vacation when I was 7 years old. But when you live there, it shapes, or it can shape who you are as a person. Either, like you said, you get chewed up and spat out, or you figure out how to survive in New York. And I think that's what sets people apart. So I actually enjoyed the fast-paced life. The ability to just, get up, walk somewhere, go wherever you want, figure out how to do things on your own. It felt so accessible to me that I wish I had stayed more in New York than I actually did, but I was only around for about 2 years before I moved to the Bay Area.
Interesting. Baz Luhrmann is an Australian film director. I don't know if you know about him. He did this commencement speech in 99. Very famous. उसके बड़े गाने भी बन गए. उसमें बड़ी interesting बात करता है. वो कहता है कि यार live in New York once but leave before it makes you hard. Live in Northern California once but leave before it makes you soft. और मैंने इसकी तशबीह देता हूँ हमेशा इस्लामाबाद और कराची से. So I was born in Saudi but essentially bred in Islamabad. And I have a lot of friends from Karachi. इस्लामाबाद जो है ना वो एक ऐसा शहर है जो कि एटलीस्ट while I was growing up, अब तो खैर उस शहर का भी DNA काफ़ी बदल गया है, बट growing up it was a city of a lot of power, not a lot of money, and not a lot of money prospects as well. So people, bureaucracy आपकी वहाँ होती थी, आपके पास military होती थी, MNCs के offices, head offices वगैरह होते थे, तो you get a lot of people जो कि जॉब पेशा, अपर मिडिल इनकम, पढ़े लिखे, एजुकेटेड, जनरली बाहर से लोग अगर रिलोकेट करके ओवरसीज़ पाकिस्तानीज वापस आ रहे होते थे तो दे वुड चूज़ इस्लामाबाद एंड वर्क देयर फॉर इन व्हाटएवर कंपनी. वहाँ का जनरली कल्चर यही होता है कि जी वो बंदा बस फ़लसफ़े में लगा रहता है, वो बड़ी बड़ी बातें कर लेगा. वो इनोवेट करने के लिए इस्लामाबाद बहुत अच्छा शहर है. वो यू हैव द माउंटेन्स, यू हैव a beautiful environment, not a lot of problems, and so you have the time, energy and opportunity to really think, and innovation requires that thinking. Karachi on the other hand, jitne bhi mere dost hain Karachi mein, you find it difficult, and I know I might offend a lot of people from Karachi, but it's just a generalized wo. Karachi mein I find it rare to see a lot of original thought coming in from Karachi. What I do see is that Islamabad generates a lot of original thought in a very sort of crappy, not very commercialized way, and then Karachi really commercializes that, right? So वो जाता है और वो जाके उसको पता है कराची के अंदर उसने across different segments interact किया हुआ है. They really know कि पाकिस्तान की हार्ट बीट क्या है और उसके लिए प्रोडक्टाइज किस तरह करना है चीज़ों को. And a lot of these friends that I've over time made in Karachi, I've also seen that there's a certain shark mentality, there's a certain sociopathy जो कि आ जाती है, because if you're in that city where there's so much happening, so you have to disconnect. Otherwise, it's very difficult emotionally to constantly be connected. And a lot of what these sort of big mega cities do is they make you feel extremely insignificant. So you don't take yourself too seriously. New York का भी same feeling था. Karachi तो हमेशा makes me feel like that कि यार आपको truly realize होता है कि यार I'm such a speck of dust in this huge desert. because there's so many people, so much is happening, and मेरी relevance उतनी नहीं है. I'm curious, if you were to contrast your experience between New York and California, how would you differentiate the culture, the vibe, the overall experience?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'll put it this way. When I moved from New York to San Francisco, that was the first time I had heard birds in a while. New York, the only thing you hear are police ke siren, yeah, taxis, gaariyan, aage piche, fire alarms. There are not a lot of birds that fly in the skies in New York. So that was the first thing I noticed. I was like, wow, you actually get to experience a little bit of nature over here. And you get a lot more time, I think, in San Francisco, which is important. So there are two things that make San Francisco, or for me at least, that was like extremely, almost like a 180 shift, was the lifestyle that people lead in the Bay Area compared to New York. So New York, obviously fast-paced, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. was normal. कि अगर आप उससे पहले कहीं निकलने जा रहे हैं या आपका backpack हो रहा है, तो people are just looking at you like, अच्छा, you must be going to the gym and then coming back to work. That Bay Area was not like that. Bay Area, apne 5 baje, you pack your bags, you go home, you're like, अच्छा, it's time to either spend time with my family or extracurriculars or, focus on your mental well-being. And I think that's important. And then the second thing is just like you said, New York is the financial, center of the world. Silicon Valley became the tech center of the world. So that industry that's already there, that's churning out these like incredible companies and startups and founders, was a magnet for the most intelligent people who wanted to focus on tech. So that also attracted me. And me, so I moved in with my best friend who was already in San Francisco. And he knew all the places, he knew everything. He loved going outdoors and on these hikes. And traditionally, he had never been a healthy person. Like, I mean, growing up in Karachi, like no one thinks about कि अच्छा मैं hike पर जाऊंगा. It's like Islamabad में, it makes sense. Karachi में कोई hike का scene ही नहीं होता. So for me to see him be like, yaar, let's go on a hike, I was like, tumse acha. Yeah, let's go. So we got to explore all of these incredible places in the Bay Area, Marin County, Upper, Redwood Forests, all of these things. And over there, you start to really think about, and again, if you want, like, your mind tends to open up. Okay, यार मैं इस दुनिया में रह रहा हूँ. There's this incredible nature around me. And coming from New York, I kept thinking, I was stuck in this rat race. I stopped appreciating, the other things in life. And New York, like I said, is just like a concrete jungle. It's just like buildings and roads and a lot of people that you never really got to see nature or these kinds of things. So in SF, that really changed my perspective on things and gave you a bit more of a relaxed mindset कि आपको काम तो करना है, but आप थोड़ा chill होके कर सकते हैं. आप, if you want to get off your chair for a bit, go for a walk or see something, that's generally allowed. So that was a huge shift in mindset, and I think that's essentially why, in my opinion, San Francisco and the Bay Area are more creative. And you come up with these sorts of innovations over there because you allow your mind to open up a bit more. And New York is more, to a certain extent, about executing on deals or these kinds of things.
Commercialization of
more global access and things like that, which draws parallels to Islamabad and Karachi. In growing up, never had the chance to really go to Islamabad that much, but I just went 2 weeks ago and really got to see it during the day. And it's gorgeous. You have these amazing hills, and you can just you just go down one road and suddenly you're in Murray Hills and wo to I was shocked, KR. It's like if I were to ever, shift or set up a second office for Safepay, Islamabad would definitely be a place where I would set it up. But Karachi is more, Karachi, now you're down to business. You have to survive over here, essentially. So you do have that shift, and depends on where you live, it shapes you as a person.
Makes sense. So you were working in the US. Somewhere down the line, you wanted to create some sort of a startup that was focused on Pakistan. I'm curious, pehla to ye ke, was this, you said there was a lot of evolution. So were there a bunch of different ideas that you sort of toyed with before you sort of landed on SafePay? And with the YC, most people say कि यार YC के अंदर अप्लाई करते हुए 2-3 दफ़ा ट्राइयाँ लगती हैं, certain validation आपको दिखानी होती है. I was also very curious when I was looking at your sort of page on YC. तो वो जो headline है उसकी कि creating XYZ for Pakistan, that's generally completely opposite to what नॉर्मल एडवाइस मिलती है पाकिस्तानी स्टार्टअप्स को कि यार अपने आप को किसी तरह रीजनली पोजीशन करो, ग्लोबली पोजीशन करो. Nobody's gonna, they're not gonna be interested if you're just talking about Pakistan. Was your pitch exclusive to Pakistan even at the time? And run me through, how did this idea sort of pop up? How did it evolve? And when you did apply to YC, was it the first time that you got in? What was that experience like?
Yeah, no, it's I don't think a lot of people know this story, but initially I was working on this app. It wasn't Safepay the way it is today. It was actually more of a way to allow people in Pakistan to send payments to each other, or send money to each other rather. There was the very popular service in the US that I'm sure you use as well on a daily basis called Venmo. And Venmo at the time was blowing up in the US. And I use it every day when I'd go out with my friends for dinner or something. We'd split the bill using Venmo, or I'd pay my part of the rent on Venmo, and it was a part of my life. And I realized that in Pakistan, maybe there could be a use case for something like this, where you have IBFT and stuff over here, but being able to send requests for money or split a bill and do the calculation and all of those kinds of things, that really didn't exist. So I was like naive at the time. I was like, let's build Venmo for Pakistan. And I built it. 30% of that was I wanted to learn mobile app development, iOS development, Android development. I was like, okay, if I want to learn something, the way I learn is that I need a project to teach myself these things. Otherwise, if I just read random stuff, it really won't interest me. So I was like, okay, fine. I have an excuse to learn now. I can build something. So I went down that road and built it. And, I don't know how, I got a merchant account at HBL at the time. That was the only bank that was offering a payment gateway, and integrated the APIs that they had, and allowed people to save a card, and they could send money from one account to the other and request payments. And, I set it, I put it live. It was on the App Store. I made my friends and family download it. Some random people also ended up downloading it. And I remember I would wake up every morning in San Francisco and just refresh how many users I had that signed up at the time. And it wasn't a lot, to be honest. I think that's when I realized that it was a bit early for Pakistan to go on something like that. And B, as a business, it didn't really have a business model, because it was free, but someone was paying for the fees, and that was me. So I'm kind of glad that didn't really blow up as much at the time, but it taught me mobile programming, and it taught me, building something and just putting it on the App Store is not the only thing that's needed to create a business. There's a lot more in terms of finding distribution and product market fit that you need. And it's not just about, hey, I've made a cool app. So those were the early days. And then I kind of went back to focus on my job for a couple of years, still tinkering. And I knew that I'll come back to it at some point, but for now, I really needed to learn other things. So I was a bit of a tech geek or whatever at the time. So, I knew I had done programming in JavaScript and backend and everything. And I knew how to write or make applications in Swift and Android or whatever. But real backend programming, I hadn't really figured out, like to build performant backend systems. And I needed to learn this new language that people were building things in called Golang. So I started in my job. I told them that I wanted to switch into like backend programming and build things on the backend to get my skills up. So I focused more on that for a couple of years, and then I got the I think I'm not sure. Maybe my dad kept sending me these articles on WhatsApp at the time of companies in Pakistan trying to do similar things. So I remember there was this company called Monet or Monet Pay that had signed something with Mastercard to build like a wallet, and then there were these like very early kind of starts of the fintech industry in Pakistan. So my dad would, he kept on sending me things on WhatsApp. Oh, you're missing out, or the opportunity is going away. Like, what are you doing? And that just created like a lot of FOMO for me for some reason. So I was like, all right, I was single at the time. I was it was 2019-ish, I think, 2018, 2019. And I was like, this is the time in my life where I have to, make a decision where I really want to focus on trying to build something, or just focusing on my job and, following that career trajectory that, we spoke about early. And I decided that I wanted to try something again, and this time really focus on it and try to take it all the way. So there are three things. There's like a triangle that someone drew for me once, where one corner of the triangle is your full-time job, one corner is your social life, and one corner is a startup. And he said you can only pick two of the three things. So you can either have a full-time job and a social life, you can either have a social life and a startup, or you can either have a startup and a full-time job. You can't have all three. So I sacrificed my social life because I needed the money and my full-time job was still paying me. So in the evenings and on the weekends, I would, start working on Safepay in the way I wanted to do it, right? So it was still, again, like teaching myself how to build a new kind of architecture, a new backend in this new language, with this new kind of technology, while keeping the goal that the end result would be Safepay, or a way that a business could accept payments from their customer, which I could charge for and create some sort of business model around. So I spent a decent amount of time, maybe like 6-8 months, building it and getting it up on the cloud and then trying it out myself and and once I felt it was ready, I put up a really small kind of announcement on this Facebook group called Pakistan Startups at the time. I think that was like the largest community of entrepreneurs in Pakistan at the time. And I was, it was very simple. I was like, I would love someone to try this and give me some feedback on it, because I thought this community would be very, helpful in that way. And I was like, for now, it's very simple. There's a plugin. You can install it on your WordPress e-commerce store, and someone can pay you using their credit or a debit card. And over there, I think it struck some sort of chord, or it resonated with people who had these e-commerce stores on WooCommerce at the time. Shopify wasn't that big. I know right now Shopify is massive, but at the time it was WooCommerce. And people reached out to me. People asked me, how can we integrate this? And at the time, it was me. So it was like me getting on calls, like you right now, you're in the US, late night calls. So I had a lot of late night calls with Pakistanis in the morning over here, walking them through installing the plugin, showing them how to, receive a payment and doing all of these things. And it was super exciting to see that, oh, someone's actually using this thing that I've built and it's helping them. So from that point, I was like, okay, this might become something. I still didn't want to quit my job. I was like, I'm a bit of a risk-averse guy, so I don't jump headfirst into something. I'm like, all right, let's see where this goes. But it was becoming more and more time-consuming, and now I had to, manage social media a little bit. Once a week, I would try to put something up, a new feature we had released, or write blog posts about what we're working on, and add more. So I remember one company that we had integrated with early on, who still uses Safepay to this day, the company called Smart Choice. They at the time were like, yeah, Ziyad, you've built this, I can accept payments, but I can't see, like, there's no dashboard for me to see the payments on. I was like, okay, yeah, that's something that's missing. So then usko banana para, and create that, and so it's very exciting at the time.
I'm a little bit curious though. And I don't know how any of this works, so
Yeah.
please ignore the complete lack of insight in this particular domain. But पाकिस्तान में जनरली फिनटेक की जब बात होती है तो उसके अंदर इमीडिएटली दिमाग में आते हैं लाइसेंसेस. उसमें दिमाग में आता है कि देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ कैपिटल कॉस्ट, चाहे वो अगेन लाइसेंसेस में हो या वो दिखाना हो कि यार मेरे पास इतना पैसा बैकिंग में है, ये है वो है. एंड जनरली आपको इसी वजह से जो लोग मिलते हैं वो बड़े कंग्लोमरेट्स होती हैं, लखानी फैमिली, तो दिस फैमिली, दैट फैमिली. It's a club, right? So a bunch of big folks come together. They generally, क्योंकि ज़्यादातर जो ये पैसे वाले business groups होते हैं, they're not very technology focused or have the expertise in technology. So काफ़ी दफ़ा वो क्या करते हैं कि वो थर्ड पार्टी कोई चाइनीज़ या यूरोपियन किसी कंपनी के साथ पार्टनर करके वो एक लोकलाइज वो ले आते हैं. अगेन ऑब्वियसली आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट बैंक्स एंड वॉलेट्स एंड दिस एंड दैट. इवन वॉलेट्स के अंदर जब हम जाते हैं तो यू हैड द टेलकोज कम इन वेयर दे हैड द टेलको DNA ऑफ बीइंग अ मार्केटिंग कंपनी, एंड सो दे वुड ब्रिंग इन एंड इस कंसल्टिंग कंपनी से कहो कि ऐप बना दे, उस कंसल्टिंग कंपनी से कहो कि उसके पीछे इंजन बना दे, इस थर्ड पार्टी को बोलो कि यार बैंक खड़ा कर दो, and we'll market the shit out of the app. And unfortunately, I think 2010-11 में ये ऐप्स आना शुरू हुई थी. 2010 से लेकर 2020-21 तक, जब तक सादा पे नहीं आया और उसने आकर के थोड़ा सा जोड़ा नहीं सबको, तो the apps were shit. They were horrible, and if there was a problem, it was never getting fixed because they did not have any control over the technology. It was mostly just third party बनी हुई है. And so the user experience was just absolutely horrible. And that made you feel like, यार ये तो बड़ी कुछ complicated चीज़ है. Just when you say कि यार मैं US में बैठा हुआ था, मैंने ना किसी से बात की ना कुछ पूछा, मैं बस गया और मैंने बनाई कर दिया. So I'm curious, how did that sort of work out? Did you not require any licenses? How were you able to? Because at the end of the day, you can code a front end with some sort of logic at the back end, but this is real money, right? So you have to have certain acknowledgements happening, and you have to make sure that the messaging layer is working properly. I'm not sure कि ये क्योंकि finance also is heavily regulated globally or locally. तो ये जो apps थी, were they focused on Pakistanis working in the international markets, and were you able to, like, were you just saying कि अच्छा जी global जो गेटवेज हैं उनके साथ मैं आपको एक फ्रंट दे दूंगा जिसमें आप जाके क्विकली अपना वो ले सकते हैं? Was there any KYC happening for these people who were like what was the product here? And उसकी regulatory situation क्या थी?
It was a real product when we built it, and it was moving real money. We were naive because we didn't know that there was a license that covered the work that we were doing, but we knew the concept of KYC, and we built it into the workflow. So we had controls where we could enable or disable a business from accepting money, and certain fraud controls, how much they could accept in a week or in a month, how many transactions, etc. And we did our best to understand the business before setting them live. But it was never governed by any license we had. It was just us trying to be cautious ourselves. From a technology standpoint, we had at the time integrated with HBL's gateway. And I think there was HBL and maybe Bank Al Falah at the time who had these electronic EPGs is what they called it, electronic payment gateways that are very strong and robust applications, but these banks weren't taking full advantage of them. And what I mean by that is that there are two things that you can do. One is you can integrate directly with their APIs and build your own experience, or you can just take something that they have built off the shelf and give it to your customers. The banks chose to do the latter. We did the former when we integrated their APIs and decided to build Safepay as something that you could do a lot more with these payment APIs. So we launched it and we were growing, and every day we'd have more and more merchants. We'd screen them, we'd speak to them, we'd understand their business model, we'd set them live, we'd process payments for them, we'd settle them, everything. And on the back of that success, or early success, I should say, we applied to Y-Combinator. And our first application got us an interview, and I think we were a bit too maybe a bit too cocky or a bit too confident going into that interview, thinking, if we figured everything out and we know how to go from here and scale this business. But the questions they asked really kind of humbled us considerably. And as expected, we got the rejection a couple of days later. But I think, so that was for one batch, that they have this winter batch and then they have a summer batch at the time. So we decided that, we'll just reapply. What's the worst that can happen? They encourage it. We got an email saying, oh, we noticed that you had applied in the winter batch. Why don't you consider reapplying again? We said, sure, okay. But this time we were a bit better prepared. And I think there were a lot of things going right for us at the time. So it was the start of COVID. We were building a fintech app, and COVID and fintech kind of were going up at the same time, and it was for Pakistan, and YC had just invested in their first ever Pakistani company the batch before us, so they were looking at these this part of the world. So we reapplied, we prepared, we wrote down like every single answer we could possibly think of for our application, and alhamdulillah we got in. After the first 3 months of Y-Combinator, we an incredible experience, everything. We were like flying high, first fintech from Pakistan to get accepted into Y-Combinator, and raise funding from Stripe and a bunch of other very cool VCs. And in October, the bank that we were working with to process our payments cut us off and shut us down, essentially. So overnight, we were unable to process payments for any business. And their claim, obviously, no regulation, no license, and they didn't really have much visibility, which sure, I get. But it was also a big mistake on our part to not really protect ourselves from the systemic risk where we're so dependent on this one entity that we were kind of competing with as well. So that shook us, and we were like, we had just raised all of this money to build this business, and now this business is almost dead. So what do we do? At that point, we we went and we started speaking to other fintechs. Like, yeah, everyone was. And one thing I realized was that Pakistanis, that this community is really helpful. And people, some of our competitors were like, rooting for our success. I remember at the time, PayFast, which is a big payment gateway like Safepay, they reached out and they were like, you guys have built something incredible. Why don't you integrate our APIs and offer payments through us? And we were like, that's a huge lifeline for us. So we did that. We started offering bank-to-bank payments, not card payments at the time, just bank-to-bank payments, just trying to stay alive through some degree or the other. And we also then took a very big decision to apply for a license. And the main reason for us to apply for the license was to get some semblance of independence. And I think that's hugely important for any business in any degree, is how much can you control? How much is in your hands? And we applied for the license. Again, like you said, it's like a club or whatever. I do think that's true to a certain extent. And I don't think the State Bank would have taken us seriously if we hadn't raised funds, especially we had the name of Stripe behind us, and I was also incredibly grateful that my grandfather was a governor for 1 year back in 1990. So I think his name still carries a lot of weight, and they were able to kind of they were like, Acha, they heard my last name, they were like, please come. So I think that was also really lucky for us. We got that introduction to the right team at the State Bank, and they encouraged us to apply and helped us with our application. We didn't realize it would take 3.5 years to get the license. But we were able to convince the State Bank to allow us to at least operate while we go through this licensing process. We had to become a business of sorts. We had payroll, we had a team that we had to pay, we had office, we had rent, etc. We had servers we had to pay for. So we needed to have some income coming in and keep our name out there. So we got that approval, and we kept building, we kept iterating, kept going through the regulatory process. Took us a while. And I think also these were still kind of early days for the State Bank. You had, before us, you had NayaPay get their EMI license. Took them about 4.5 years. They were the guinea pig for the State Bank. Then you had SadaPay, got their EMI. Also took them 3.5 years to get commercial approval. PayFast also took them a really long time, and then us. Now we're in 2025, and the State Bank's really trying to accelerate this process. So anyone who comes in, who applies, who shows that they have a good regulatory posture, a team in place, a business model, etc., I think they can be fast-tracked through some sort of licensing process. But for us, it was like, you guys are the guinea pigs, so we're gonna take your time with you. But if there's one thing that's important for a startup, and that's some measure of how successful they'll be, it's determination. I think there were so many times where we could have just given up and returned money back to our investors. So many times where we were like, this is just not worth it. We both left, good jobs in the US for this. We could have been like, we can go back, get that cushy lifestyle in the Bay Area, and but I think just the determination to see this through is what made us go through it.
मेक सेंस. मुझे आपने जब आपने बोला कि 2020 से पहले वाली जो स्टोरी है उसके अंदर देयर इज जस्ट यू बिल्डिंग दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ ए टेक्नोलॉजी लेयर and integrating that with existing infrastructure that already exists. And as I mentioned earlier, there is the Rails part of things, which is the banks providing those Rails, and then there is the user experience part of things, which the banks do a horrible job even till date. what you basically did was you were able to procure those rails and then build a user experience layer on top of that, and that you did all on your own, did not, at least whatever the sort of MVP version of that was at the time. um Again, मैंने अपने उसके लिए ना छोटे लेवल के ऊपर, और आई थिंक जब आप स्टार्ट कर रहे थे तो यू वुड बी अ स्मॉल एंटिटी एज वेल, मैंने बड़ी दफ़ा बैंक्स को रीच आउट करने की कोशिश किया। हैड अ ई कॉमर्स बिजनेस 2018-19 में। उस टाइम पे हम सोच रहे थे कि यार पेमेंट गेटवेज इंटीग्रेट कर लें। वो बैंक ट्रांसफ़र लेना पड़ता था और बड़ी ख्वारी होती थी, या कैश ऑन डिलीवरी करना पड़ता था। और हमारी जनरली SEC AB ऑडियंस थी, तो एवरीबडी हैड अ बैंक अकाउंट एंड अ बैंक कार्ड, और देयर फादर्स वुड हैव इट और देयर siblings would have it. And my father was a career banker as well. I had a lot of connections at banks. It was a nightmare. Getting payment gateway, like उनके तो अपने गेटवेज होते थे, और उनसे ये करवाना कि यार आप मेरी, तो वो उनको ये होता था कौन है, क्यों लेना चाहते हैं। हालांकि प्रोडक्ट ही आपकी ये है भाई, प्रोडक्ट इज टारगेटेड टूवर्ड्स ई कॉमर्स प्लेयर्स, बट इट वाज सच अ नाइटमेयर। एंड अगर वो कभी ना कोई मिल भी जाता था, तो जब API लेवल के ऊपर बात आती थी, एंड दैट वाज नॉट जस्ट विद द बैंक्स। आई रिमेंबर हम, अब तो खैर मार्केट बहुत ज़्यादा मेच्योर हो चुकी है, बट उस टाइम के ऊपर देयर वाज दिस कंपनी कॉल्ड कॉल कोरियर, एंड देन देयर वाज TCS, एंड आप इन कंपनीज ने भी अगेन थर्ड पार्टी से चीज़ें बनवाई हुई थी। आपने अगर वो शॉपिफाई या वो कॉमर्स के ऊपर API इंटीग्रेट करनी होती थी, और आपका वो जो सेल्स एजेंट आता था जो कि आपको अकाउंट भेजता था, तो आप उससे कहते थे API, तो कहता था सर API व्हाट यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट। एंड गेटिंग, यू न्यू कि यार प्रोडक्ट एग्जिस्ट करती है, किसी सॉफ्टवेयर हाउस ने इस लास्ट माइल डिलीवरी लॉजिस्टिक्स कंपनी के लिए बना तो दिया है, बट दे हैव नो आइडिया हाउ इट वर्क्स, एंड they have absolutely no way of helping you in integrating that properly. And so I'm curious, how does one single individual sitting in the US, completely disconnected from Pakistan for almost a decade, come about being able to procure APIs in the based on जो मेरा एक्सपीरियंस रहा था कि आप तो पाकिस्तान में रहकर आप शक्ल दिखा के उनके पास 50 चक्कर लगा करके हाथ जोड़ के उनसे ले सकते थे, जो कि आपने शायद स्टेट बैंक के टाइम पे किया होगा इवेंचुअली। लेकिन आप जब बाहर बैठे हुए, तो हाउ डज देन वन एबल टू से कि ओके दिस इज़ मी, दिस इज़ अ कंपनी, दिस इज़ द प्रोडक्ट, आई नीड एन API and I need to integrate with that API, and obviously those rails are now processing payments. So there is someone somewhere looking at that and seeing ke money going in, money going out, and how Pakistan is. Like banking is like guilty unless proven innocent wala situation hoti hai, where they're like, until and unless we have full visibility, we're gonna make sure ke, you have hell. So tell me a bit about that in the early stages. And साथ ही tie in करके, 2020 later, the language changed to we. And I'm curious what that we meant. Was it post YC where you had some money and you were able to then hire someone? Did you find a co-founder? When did you go from me to we?
So me to we was back in late 2019, before our second application to Y-Combinator. That was when another very close friend, childhood friend that we all kind of grew up together, and we did our high schooling and everything together. He wanted to also work or help me build this, essentially. Luckily for me, he was a financial regulatory lawyer by training.
Interesting.
And he had he went to college in the UK, and he was working at a very prestigious law firm at the time, doing working with the UK central bank and Barclays and banks like that, etc. So he was very kind of knowledgeable of regulatory posture and what it's needed to eventually work with the state bank and the license, and creating legal documents, etc. So he basically joined me, and together we applied to Y-Combinator, and we've been co-founders since, essentially. So that's the answer to your first question. On the second side, I think for me, I remember I came back once in the winter to Karachi, and I kind of just wanted, like you mentioned, like to find a payment gateway, like who's giving a payment gateway. and I spoke to like different e-commerce store owners, etc. And all of that advice led me to HBL. My dada at the time was still alive, so luckily he put me in touch with someone at HBL and the right team, and I went and met with them, and they told me that the payment gateway that they were using is this product called CyberSource. It's owned by Visa, and they can give it to me, and giving the whole kind of sales pitch, and I wasn't interested in what they were offering, because what they were offering was more tuned for maybe like an e-commerce store के यार आप हमारा link लगा दें या button लगा दें और वो pop-up में खुल जाएगा new. तो I was like, वो मुझे नहीं चाहिए. And again, they didn't know much about the APIs or the backend kind of thing, because their team was mostly on sales. But I knew what CyberSource was. I'd heard about it. And obviously I knew what Visa was. And if Visa had this product that they had acquired called CyberSource, then I'm sure CyberSource would have some APIs. So for me, I just went down a rabbit hole. कि CyberSource की मैंने documentation पढ़ना शुरू की, and it was a कुछ, I don't know, 200 page, मतलब आपको कुछ भी करना हो आप कर सकते हैं उनकी APIs के साथ. It was very powerful. And for me, it was like, अच्छा मैं ये ऐसे करना है, ये करना है, फिर, got deeper. Ended up understanding their entire kind of API stack and building out whatever I needed to build out and integrated their APIs. I think at the time, I was the only HBL customer who had integrated their APIs.
So just to confirm, the way that it worked was you were this one customer that was processing all payments under one roof, and then using your software were able to break it down across multiple vendors. And so as the payment was processed, did the payment land in your account first and then was processed through the vendor eventually? Or was it then autonomously rerouted to the vendor?
No, it was it all used to fall into our account, because we were essentially one merchant ID, MID jo hoti hai, and all of our payments were going through that MID. But obviously, we were distributing it across our different merchants, and money would land into our bank account. And whenever a merchant, and we would keep a ledger, so a merchant could see, okay, mere 1 lakh ho gaye hain, yeah, I've processed 1,000 payments, and etc. When they wanted to cash out, we would get that request. And every day, I remember, I would get maybe like a bunch of cash out requests. So I would consolidate them in this Excel file, and email them to HBL and tell them or to a different team. It was actually the corporate portal, the corporate payments hoti hain. I was like, upload a file to the corporate portal, and wahan se the money would go out to these merchants. So it was a very jugaad system back in the day.
And you had like a margin on top of whatever the bank was offering you. जो क्या होता है MDR rate?
जी. Yeah, so the bank had given us an MDR, which is the merchant discount rate, or the fee that they charge. And uske upar, we had to make our margin. So I think when we started, I was just literally copying Stripe at the time at 2.9% plus 30 rupees at the time. I was like, it sounds reasonable. Let's do it.
That's just nuts. I'm curious, when these guys actually sort of cut you off, and that was 2022?
Yeah. No, 2021.
What was your average monthly revenue, or how much of money was moving on average to that one singular? I mean, that just sounds crazy to me. Okay, you were alive for 2 years. You lived through YC and everything, while this jugaad was happening, and nobody. Wow, incredible. But what was I'm curious about the numbers, because obviously it's consolidating into one account and then you're manually doing it. So how much was moving in a month on average?
So I remember, I think when we were going through YC, we had to give these weekly updates, and we were growing. And I remember one figure, I think it was around like $350,000 in a month that we had processed. And that was also growing maybe 10-15% like month over month. So, and in terms of a team, it was just literally 2 or 3 of us. We had hired maybe a consultant or a contractor to help us out. So decent
and
money.
so there was, I mean, again, 3.5 लाख तो आपने YC के टाइम पे करा है, तो 2021 में, आई एम श्योर 2022 में नंबर बहुत बड़ा होगा. टैक्स इम्प्लीकेशंस या उसकी, मतलब वर यू नॉट थिंकिंग अबाउट कि यार ये मेरे नंबर्स इतने बड़े हैं, फॉर ऑल इंटेंट्स एंड पर्पसेस मैं किसको क्या समझाऊंगा कि सर ये बिजनेस मॉडल है, ये चीज़ चल रही है. उसने तो ये देखना है कि भाई तुम्हारे भाई बैंक अकाउंट के अंदर 50 करोड़ रुपया आया है पिछले साल, और तुमने सारा वेंडर्स को भेज दिया है. मतलब व्हाट आर यू टॉकिंग अबाउट, राइट? वेयर इज द प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी, वेयर इज द मनी? ये तो टैक्स फ्रॉड कर रहे हो तुम, स्मगलिंग कर रहे हो, क्या कर रहे हो? And so did that thought not come to your mind at the time? Yeah, were you too much of a American DNA at the time? कि यार, as long as we can create value, we'll create value and we'll see the problems when they arise.
I think it's very Americanized at the time. And then something we spoke about earlier, which was very sheltered and bubble. So growing up, we didn't think about FBR, tax, these kinds of things. I mean, it was, money comes in, money goes out, that kind of a system.
Fascinating.
It was that. It was just 2 of us trying to just build something, and like you mentioned, do it now and then ask for forgiveness later, and hopefully they'll forgive us.
Yeah. So tell me about the current scale of Safepay. How many vendors or clients, or what you might call them? What's the revenue? What's the business model now? You have the license. Congratulations on that. I think that I saw the news 4 months ago. I'm not sure when that actually got processed. Tell me about the fundraising that you've done over time. Overall health कैसी है? Profitability की क्या situation है? Growth की क्या situation है?
Yeah, no, from a financial perspective, I think Alhamdulillah we're doing well. We're to date processing roughly around, I think, 1.5 to 2 billion rupees a month across 400,000 transactions for businesses, large e-commerce brands, domestic large e-commerce brands, as well as a few global e-commerce brands, all the way to startups that are using us to power their payment journeys for their customers. And we've done this across essentially 2 rounds of fundraising. One we did right after Y-Combinator in 2020, and then one we did early 2022. Uske baad we haven't raised a round, and we've been very diligent with the money and how we spend it. Because I think, there was what you mentioned earlier, there was a downturn in the startup ecosystem in Pakistan. We could kind of see that in the writing, both from Pakistan and from a global perspective, that the US was about to raise interest rates very quickly, and that was going to really slow down this era of free money. And we needed to close our round as quickly as possible, which alhamdulillah we managed to do. And then after that, it was just about us turning this into a real business and trying to become profitable. And that's been our goal. And alhamdulillah, we're almost there. We're very close. And I think within the next 6 to 8 months, we'll be there. And then we'll be a business, right? A business is something that can sustain itself and grow and make money for shareholders, as opposed to just consuming capital. So we're looking to kind of do that for ourselves.
Makes sense. What's the headcount right now in terms of the total number of employees? You have an office, just one office in Karachi?
Yeah, so we're 30 people overall. Majority of our team's in Karachi, and we have a few remote workers in Lahore and Islamabad.
I see. जो आपका license हो गया है, so basically what does that allow you to do? Does that allow you to now directly work with Visa and be able to take their gateway essentially? Or are you still using some sort of a third party?
Yeah, so I
Backend.
think the license was one of the things that gave us that independence. So we can now work directly with Visa and Mastercard, which we do today. We can create relationships with different financial institutions, both locally and internationally. And we can work very closely with the state bank on new initiatives that we want to bring to market. And I think all of these things are really important because it gives us the ability to craft our own journey and do the things that we want to do as a business, as opposed to rely on a third party to do some of these things. One of the biggest things that it's allowed us to do is really take advantage of RAAST, which is the new kind of instant payment system that the state bank launched a couple of years ago. And because we're a regulated entity, we get to integrate directly into it, and offer that to businesses and to other fintechs and to merchants, etc., which is something that we're incredibly excited for. So I think when we were getting the license, a lot of people were like, ab to phas gaye basically, and why do you shouldn't have gotten the license? You could have just worked with a third party and been independent. And we felt that a little bit, just because the process, there was so much bureaucracy, so much red tape, and it's just very time consuming. But I think after that, when we got it, is when you really start to see the real benefits in that, now it's like you're a legitimate financial institution in this country.
मुझे बताएं कि अगेन आई एम क्यूरियस, एक जो मॉडल है 2.9% प्लस 30 रुपीज़, आई ऑब्वियसली मुझे नहीं पता इसमें कितना पब्लिकली नंबर दे सकते हैं, बट व्हाट्स द नंबर दैट जो पीछे से आपको वीज़ा की कॉस्ट आ रही होती है? लाइक आई एम ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड कि इस बिजनेस मॉडल के अंदर व्हाट्स योर परसेंटेज ऑफ अ ट्रांजैक्शन that you can actually make. I understand 30 rupees is what you're essentially, वो flat out वो आपने अपनी जेब में डालना है कि यार इस ट्रांजैक्शन का मुझे कुछ तो मेरा बने. बट जो 2.9% है उसके ऊपर नॉर्मली, जिस तरह मिडल ईस्ट में जो मैंने देखा तो वो यही था कि डिपेंडिंग ऑन द डील दैट यू स्ट्राइक, तो वो एनीवेयर बिटवीन 1.5 to 3% के ऊपर भी पेमेंट गेटवेज चल रहे हैं. और वो यही है कि कहीं ना कहीं डिफरेंट पार्टनर्स ने, किसी ने 0.25 उठा लिया, 0.5 उठा लिया, और फिर पीछे जो आपका मेन गेटवे है वो भी अपनी अमाउंट रख रहा है. तो व्हाट डज दैट लुक लाइक? एंड इन टर्म्स ऑफ योर स्केल राइट नाउ, or rather the landscape, who are the major players? Where do you stack up in those players? And how has your growth looked like over the last 3 years while you had like an approval to work? And I'm assuming that approval was for sandboxed, sort of not very aggressive operations, but just enough for you to survive. And since the license, how has the growth been so far?
So on the pricing, it was when we were working with HBL, or let's say if you work with a third party as a business, it's very simple. They like with us with HBL gave us an MDR and they said this is what we're going to charge you, and iske upar jo aapko charge karna hai aap wo rakh sakte hain. We thought that when we went directly with Visa and Mastercard, ऐसा ही होगा. वीज़ा हमसे एक चीज़ चार्ज करेगा कि मैं आपसे 2% नहीं, मैं आपसे 1.5% लूँगा, उसके ऊपर आपको जो चार्ज करना है आप कर सकते हैं. Turns out we were very, very wrong. And Visa and Mastercard have some of the most complicated, complex pricings that I've ever had to experience in my life. मतलब वो आपको monthly भी charge करते हैं. Monthly आपको for being a member of Visa or Mastercard monthly charge होता है. Per transaction भी आपको charge होता है. आपको per attempt charge होता है, चाहे वो transaction successful हो या failure में हो, या उसके आपको charges लगते हैं. आपको अगर आप cross border, let's say आप international payment कर रहे हो, cross border के charges लगते हैं. You name it, वो आपको कहीं ना कहीं से आपसे पैसे निकाल रहा होता है. And it's their business model. That's why they're a hugely successful, public company in the US. They make a lot of money. So for us to take all of that, those different price points that we are charged, and convert it into something simple for a business, okay, this is something we'll charge you, बाकी सब कुछ we'll we'll pay for. We have to figure out what's the right number. So initially we had 2.9 plus 30, and the 30 didn't go to us. The 30 was also to bear the per transaction fixed cost. तो क्योंकि वो 11 cent charge करते हैं essentially at the time, 11 cents for every transaction, and that translated to 30 rupees. You know, so for us it was how can we give you something that is easy to understand, and at the back end we'll manage all of the complicated stuff with Visa and Mastercard in terms of whatever we're charged. For some transactions, if we make money, great. If we lose money on a transaction, whatever.
तो वो आप basically unified experience के अंदर you're basically creating an actuarial model where it eventually works out.
And then we had to evolve this pricing model. So there's so much crazy things. So if you're in America, right? Let's say you have a card issued by Chase Bank or Bank of America or something. आप वो इस्तेमाल करेंगे, वीज़ा उस पर और चार्ज करेगा. बट अगर आप अपना पाकिस्तानी कार्ड इस्तेमाल करेंगे, उस पर वीज़ा कम चार्ज करेगा. So differences between international and domestic and in these kinds of things, they also have now made it into our pricing where we charge cheaper for domestic transaction, but more for an international transaction.
Interesting.
And that's just for cards. So अब inshallah RAAST हम launch करना जाएंगे. उसके लिए we're going to try and do a very, very low cost price for businesses.
So अब मेरा सवाल उसमें दूसरा ये है कि पाकिस्तान में ना पेमेंट गेटवेज का एक और भी मसला रहा है. एक तो चलें ये मसला रहा है कि यूज़र यूएक्स बहुत क्रैपी था, बट इवन बैक एंड के ऊपर पेमेंट्स नहीं होती फॉर सम रीज़न. वो ऑनलाइन पेमेंट्स जो हैं वो जी इनेबल नहीं हुई थी, तो ये मसला था. तो वो मसला था. मैं स्ट्राइप में करता, आई वाज डूइंग स्ट्राइप फॉर अ बिट एंड दैट वाज अ नाइटमेयर बिकॉज वो दुबई बेस्ड था और उसमें वो बेसिकली इफेक्टिवली वो इंटरनेशनल पेमेंट थी जो भी हो रही थी. तो वो 95% ऑफ द पाकिस्तानी बैंक्स वो कहते थे कि कोई 2 नंबर है, कोई फ्रॉड हो रहा है, कोई ये. फिर हमें उनको बताना, फिर मुझे एक कस्टमर के साथ कॉल पे बैठ के उसको करना पड़ता था कि भाई बैंक को कॉल करें, उनको ये बताएं. चूँकि मेरी प्रोडक्ट ही ऐसी थी कि इट वाज अ हाई टिकट आइटम एंड वेरी एक्सक्लूसिव ऑडियंस. बट अगर मुझे मैस में जाना पड़ता तो दैट वाज जस्ट अ नाइटमेयर टू बी ऑनेस्ट. क्योंकि वो और उसमें भी वो यही जो आपने जिस तरह बोला कि जी वो ट्रांजैक्शन कन्वर्जन के ऊपर अलग फ़ीस है और इसके ऊपर अलग फ़ीस है और उसके ऊपर वो करते कराते वो तो कोई वारा ही ना खाता अगर मैं 1,000-1,500 रुपया उस ट्रांजैक्शन से निकाल रहा होता. बट जनरली पाकिस्तानी यानी कि जो पाकिस्तानी बैंक साइड है, जब उसमें वो पेमेंट आती है तो वो मना कर देते हैं. इट्स नॉट एज सिंपल एज के बस जो है जी पेमेंट गई. जिस तरह आप बाहर जाते हैं पेमेंट हो जाती है, कुछ नहीं होता, बस पेमेंट हो गई है. सो where is that problem? Is that the servers on the bank side? अच्छा, पे पेमेंट्स बड़ी स्लो भी होती हैं for some weird reason, right? दुनिया में आप जाते हैं, यहाँ पे वो कार्ड डालते हैं, क्लिक करते हैं, सेकंड और 2 के अंदर वो प्रोसेस करता है, अप्रूव करता है, वापस आ जाती है. पाकिस्तान में वो एच.बी.एल का अगर पेमेंट गेटवे लगा हो तो वो घूमता ही रहता है और अब आप वेट कर रहे हो, दरमियान में इंटरनेट चला गया, लाइट चली गई और अब आप बैठ गए, पता नहीं पेमेंट हुई है नहीं हुई, क्या मसाइल हो गए. So how is that experience? How was that experience when you had HBL at the backbone? And how is that experience now?
So I think a lot of it depends on just the industry as a whole. कि अगर आप देखें कि बैंक्स ने अपनी इंटीग्रेशन कैसे की थी, it was mostly outsourced to these technology vendors who, chalo, they were focused on financial software, but still very outsourced, right? And they never thought about कि एक चीज़ आएगी e-commerce जो हमारे stores they'll adopt it and the mulk will adopt it. Pakistan was before COVID very much brick and mortar. COVID की वजह से people were forced to move online and then they realized that this is something that can become a sustainable business, so let's focus on it. But up until 2020, 2019, it was very much brick and mortar. तो वो POS पर investment कर रहे हैं या ATMs में investment कर रहे हैं. E-commerce पर there was literally zero investment. For banks, Visa and Mastercard ने उनको convince किया था कि यार आप हमसे gateway ले लें. Just add it to your product. पैसे आप बनाएं ना बनाएं बस ले लें, रख लें. So banks also thought the same way, right? कि if a merchant comes to us and says कि मुझे चाहिए ही चाहिए तो हम देंगे, वरना पड़ा रहेगा. I think when COVID happened, when fintechs like Safepay, PayFast, NayaPay, SadaPay started developing things on their own, banks started to take notice. So शुरुआत में it was like you're describing कि customer के कार्ड इनेबल नहीं हुआ या फंड नहीं है या बैंक ने बस डिक्लाइन ही कर दिया, चलो दैट्स ऑल्सो मेकिंग अ पेमेंट, राइट? अब आप ई कॉमर्स में आपको पता है कि रिफंड्स आर अ वेरी बिग पार्ट ऑफ ई कॉमर्स. अमेरिका में रिफंड्स आर प्रीटी रोबस्ट, राइट? चलो अब you're 95% श्योर कि आपको पैसे वापस मिल जाएंगे as soon as a merchant refunds, even if it takes 5 days, 7 days. पाकिस्तान में there was no surety कि आपको पैसे कब मिलेंगे और मिलेंगे भी या नहीं with a refund. And if you look at payments, there are two major parties. One is the acquirer, which is Safepay, that works with a merchant, and the other is the issuer, which is the bank that works with the customer. तो हमारी जिम्मेदारी क्या है कि यार हमें कस्टमर से पैसे लेने हैं और मर्चेंट को देने हैं. एंड अगर मर्चेंट के पास वो चीज़ नहीं है तो ही कैन इशू अ रिफंड, और हमें बस बैंक को बताना है कि यार ये पैसे आप वापस ले लें, आपके कस्टमर के हैं. तो जब व्हेन वीव डन दैट पार्ट ऑन अ रिफंड, उस बैंक की जिम्मेदारी हो जाती है कि यार उस कस्टमर को वापस क्रेडिट करे अपने अकाउंट में. अब वो नहीं होता, वो होता है नहीं होता. अब मसला है, कस्टमर हमें फ़ोन कर रहा है कि यार पैसे मेरे नहीं आए हैं वापस. देन वी डू अ लॉट ऑफ बैक एंड फोर्थ विद द बैंक कि यार आप इसको देख लें, ये डिटेल है, ये आईडी है, आप इस कस्टमर को वापस दे दें. सो इट्स स्टिल अ वेरी मैनुअलिश काइंड ऑफ प्रोसेस इन पाकिस्तान. And that's solely because there's a disconnect between the bank and the technology that they're using. क्योंकि मुझे याद है, I was on a call with one of these banks, talking about an issue like this, right? कि आपकी declines काफ़ी ज़्यादा हो रही हैं. And a merchant was concerned कि यार मेरी चलो अल्फला बैंक की 70% एक्सेप्टेंस रेट है, इस बैंक की 60 है, यार तुम्हारी बैंक की मुझे 5% एक्सेप्टेंस रेट क्यों आ रही है? आपके कस्टमर्स सफ़र कर रहे हैं, दे कांट बाय थिंग्स फ्रॉम माई स्टोर. सो वी scheduled a call with that bank. And that bank brought on their technology vendor to the call. And I was like, if there's that disconnect with the bank doesn't know, और technology vendor सब बोल रहे, अच्छा जी सर मैं देखता हूँ पीछे क्या हुआ है ये, then it's not really going to work like that, right? Like for companies like us, where this is our bread and butter, payments, even for fintechs like NayaPay or whatever, you have to own the product, you have to own the technology, you have to understand everything. वरना आप नहीं हो सकते.
Is the experience better with the fintech players, Sada, Naya, or I don't know, Easy Paisa, Jazz Cash, folks like those?
So I think that it was much better, and it is still better. I wouldn't say much better. I think the banks did start to take things seriously. They thought कि obviously competition आ रहा है, and they need to step up. So they started to then invest. And if you look at the bigger banks now, Mizan हो गया, HBL हो गया, Alfala, their digital experience, even UBL, their digital experiences have become significantly better than when they were. But for them as a bank, they need to focus on multiple areas, right? वो deposits भी लेते हैं, lending भी करते हैं, loans भी, car loans, house loan, ये वो फलाना, corporate banking. So they need to focus on a lot of things at the same time. But for companies like us, we have one focus, कि हमें बस payments ही करनी है. So for us, we're able to move faster and get ahead more often than these banks. So we'll always be ahead, I think, but banks have started to catch up and take things more seriously.
Makes sense. You said that this year you're looking at being profitable. Is that coming soon?
Inshallah, yeah. If everything goes well and we're able to kind of hit our targets, and if there's no macro event that is out of our control, then at least for me, my goal is to hit some semblance of profitability. Yeah.
जो सीड राउंड आपने उठाया था वो वाज द नंबर पब्लिक एट एनी पॉइंट कि वो किस साइज का था और
Then we did two seeds, I guess one seed and one seed extension, but in total it was around $5.4 million.
and are you looking towards another round of investments anytime in the near future?
We will. I think but we'll do it on our terms. I think that's also important in the sense that when we're ready with the next round of products that we want to launch, and we're able to kind of show a lot more growth than I want to than we have right now, then we'll go out and raise funds.
That the Stripe investment, is that just like a angel small ticket investment, or is there some sort of a knowledge transfer institutional जो एक आपकी एक base होती है ना ज़ाहिर है they're a behemoth and so their experience would be fairly useful to be working in this industry. And I'm curious about the working relationship there because technically Stripe is a competition because you're literally creating the same product. But then technically also Stripe doesn't want to be in Pakistan because for them, Pakistan, I mean, for any international fintech player, Pakistan is a regulatory nightmare and it's easier for them to have someone else figure it out and eventually work through them. Possibly as just a node in this complicated market or possibly through an acquisition in the grand scheme of things. So I'm curious, what does that working relationship look like? Is it just an investment? Is it more than just an investment? And generally when you raised funding, what sort of investors did you have?
Yeah, so I think Stripe from the start, it was a huge inspiration and still continues to be to this day. When they invested in us, we didn't think much. I mean, obviously we were extremely excited, but we didn't think of how that relationship would evolve. And over time, I think they've become an extremely helpful and active part of our journey, to the extent where we are seeking their help. They haven't been the investor who's always in our business or is very nosy about what we're doing or why we're doing things. But if we have any questions about how to navigate certain elements, they are usually the ones we turn to because we know that they've probably been in this situation maybe 5 years past. So yeah, I mean, they're like huge, and we are probably where they were in like 2014, 15 or something, but their experiences have been immensely helpful for us whenever we wanted to, let's say, talk to Visa or Mastercard or even the central bank. Like, they've come in and they've spoken to the state bank alongside us. They've written letters to the state bank on our request for certain things. So they've been very helpful from that perspective. And I think other investors who came alongside Stripe were these investors that were, interestingly enough, they had some sort of stake in Pakistan. So Global Founders Capital, which is the investment arm of Rocket Internet, had companies in Pakistan. The RAAST and Azmalo at the time, I think, was Rocket Internet as well. And, so they were interested in Pakistan. We had this investment or VC company called Hoff Capital, which is founded by this family in Egypt, the Sawaris family, who actually started Mobilink in Pakistan.
Ah, interesting.
So they have a huge, interest in Pakistan. And then, Fatima Gobi Ventures, who was Fatima Group and Gobi Collaboration, they invested in us. So very interesting VCs that I think just generally were, and then some who had no relation to Pakistan, but were just like, Pakistan's like has this great demographic fifth largest country in the world by population, the youngest growing group of people here, and they were just fascinated by it, and we were able to tell them that story.
Makes sense. Again, so again, my landscape का आपसे पूछूं, we understand PayFast exists, and then all of these banks are providing their own sort of payment gateways as well. Who are the top 5 players right now in the payment gateway space?
So yeah, I would say the banks, Al Falah, HBL, Mizan Bank, and then PayFast and us.
And where would you rank in terms of transactions processed?
I think we're all doing similar numbers, to be honest. I think the market is very big. I remember I was talking to one of our partners, and at some point, I think we were doing the same number of transactions as HBL. And then it depends, right? Sometimes your value of payments that you process is more. Sometimes the volume of transactions that you process is more. So it depends on what number. But I think, alhamdulillah, we've grown enough now that we're at the same level as some of these banks. And the fact that we have a license kind of puts us at the same level as these banks as well, from the state bank's perspective, because then you also have a lot of fintechs that are offering payment services or payment gateways that don't have a license and are piggybacking off of someone's license, like essentially what we were doing in the past. But those kinds of companies also exist in Pakistan. But I think it's, payment gateways is the main kind of thing that all of us do today. But I think very quickly that is going to change depending on what direction each company kind of goes into. So I don't think, at least for Safepay, staying in the payment or exclusively doing payment gateway business or as a service is, what we're going to be doing. I think now, because we have the license, we can do so many more interesting things.
What's the license generally? Is it like an EMI license or a क्या होता है वो
PSP? So ours is a PSP license. It's a payment service provider license.
Okay.
So generally 2 licenses हैं, अब 3 हो गए हैं, but एक तो EMI है जो आप जिसके थ्रू आप वॉलेट खोल सकते हैं, which is what नया पे and सादा पे have. वो कस्टमर के अकाउंट्स खोल सकते हैं, उनको IBAN इशू कर सकते हैं, उनसे पैसे की डिपॉजिट ले सकते हैं. On the other side is आप PSP या PSO हैं, जो हम सेफ पे हैं, PayFast, OneLink और NIFT, ये 4. And what we do is we operate a payment service, or we provide a payment service essentially. तो आप पैसे यहाँ से वहाँ कर रहे हैं, या आपने कोई नई पेमेंट सर्विस आपने बनाई है जिसके थ्रू बिजनेसेस को आसानी होती है या कस्टमर्स को आसानी होती है. In some respects, you're helping the digitization of Pakistan. तो अब State Bank, they're obviously excited about digitization, so they're asking us and the community to come up with new ideas. कि आप क्या कर सकते हैं. So for us to say कि हम सिर्फ हमारी पूरी ज़िंदगी बस पेमेंट गेटवे प्रोवाइड करते रहेंगे, that's probably a bit naive, where we want to keep building and bringing new things to Pakistan, and I think that's going to...
What would the new things look like? So I mean, जब मैं normally दूसरे fintech से बात करता हूँ तो वो फिर आके शुरू होते हैं पेमेंट से और वॉलेट से और एंड होते हैं लेंडिंग के ऊपर, राइट? कि पैसा तो सारा लेंडिंग में. तो आई एम क्यूरियस कि लेंडिंग में आप क्या कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि आपका लाइसेंस जो है वो पैसा रखवा तो नहीं सकता, ना ही आप पैसा दे सकते हैं. तो क्या आप कोई क्रेडिट स्कोरिंग के अंदर घुस रहे हैं? क्या आप व्हाट कैन यू डू इन टर्म्स ऑफ जस्ट ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग? आई एम नॉट सेइंग यू विल डू इट, बट व्हाट within the boundary that you have, what are the possibilities?
So I don't think we'll go into lending.
I did see a buy now pay later somewhere on the website, but I'm not sure if that's a...
नहीं, हम BNPL नहीं करते. We can enable BNPL providers because we do all of the card processing at the back end, और उसकी tokenization और सब कुछ, उसका पूरा infrastructure हमने बनाया हुआ है. But what we're currently doing right now, if you think about it from a business perspective, is हम payment की acceptance कर रहे हैं. What's known as pay-ins. हम customer से, we're taking money and we're giving it to a business. The reverse where let's say आप एक business हैं, आप एक marketplace चला रहे हैं, या आपके पास vendors हैं that you need to make payments to, or you need to make disbursements to, जो payout कहलाता है. Traditionally, no one's really been able to crack the payout business. And for us, it's something that we've been wanting to do, and we've gotten a lot of demand from businesses who use us today कि यार आप हमें ये भी करवा के देते हैं.
Explain that in real world context. What does that look like?
So let's say आप InDrive, right? InDrive has a lot of drivers, obviously, that they need to make payments to. Customer जब payment करता है InDrive को, let's say it's a digital payment, Easy पैसा या Jazz Cash के through customer payment करता है, that money goes to InDrive. अब InDrive को अब वो पैसे अपने ड्राइवर्स को डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करने हैं, राइट? तो वो InDrive क्या करता है कि अपने ड्राइवर को दिखाता है कि यार आपके पास अब 10,000 रुपये जमा हो गए हैं, आप कैश आउट कर सकते हो.
अच्छा, सो बेसिकली जो आपका मसला था HBL के साथ, उसी को उसकी टेक्नोलॉजी बना करके आप सिंगुलर सिस्टम में ले आए कि यार भाई मैं अपना वो जो सड़ी सी एक्सेल फाइल भेजता था मैं उनको ऑनबोर्ड कर लेता हूँ ताकि वो डायरेक्ट प्रोसेस होके मेरे अकाउंट से ना गुजरे, वो डायरेक्टली उधर चले जाए.
बिल्कुल. एंड थ्रू some sort of APIs, essentially, because our whole business is around technology, and one of the things that I'm excited about is more and more people are asking for APIs. जो आप पहले कह रहे थे कि API का लफ्ज़ कोई जानता ही नहीं था, that's really starting to change, and that's like really exciting कि लोग पहले पूछते हैं कि यार इसकी API, इसकी documentation, इसके कोई SDKs हैं आपके पास. तो from that perspective, I think it took us a while, this ecosystem evolved over 5 years at least, but now it's getting to the point where fintechs, especially people who invest in technology, can now start to really accelerate and differentiate themselves from the rest of the market. So payouts is one of the things that we're really kind of excited about. RAAST and bringing RAAST to all of our merchants, to new merchants that we've never had the chance to go after before. For instance, Safepay's right today is purely online. आपको online payment accept करनी है, Safepay will probably be the best to let you accept that. लेकिन अगर आपको offline payment accept करनी है, we don't exist in the offline world. RAAST के through, we can use our technology and enable a lot of in-person payment experiences through, let's say, dynamic QR codes or static QR codes, and managing all of the RAAST reconciliation and payments and all of these kinds of things ourselves. So that's something that we're very excited about. And then personally speaking, I've always been a huge fan of crypto and what that unlocks for people. And I think Pakistan is finally warming up to the idea of how to regulate cryptocurrencies in the market, how to regulate stable coins in the market, how to leverage this technology to help people in this country and help the country itself. And that's something where I also want to take my company and explore into. So there's a lot that we want to kind of try out.
I want to touch upon RAAST a little bit. RAAST जब originally आया था तो the idea was, and I remember उस टाइम पे हम बात कर रहे थे तो हर सारे बैंक्स और सब फिनटेक्स और सब आई कहते थे कि यार पाकिस्तान में डिजिटल पेमेंट नहीं हो रही क्योंकि रेल्स नहीं है और रेल्स जो है वो RAAST लेकर आया और सारा कुछ. RAAST, obviously the promise was very glamorous and the idea was 1 QR आ जाएगा और हमारा रेडी वाला भी डिजिटल पेमेंट एक्सेप्ट करेगा और so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the uptake hasn't been as fast as we'd sort of imagined. I actually read a very interesting piece by Profit magazine recently, जिसमें वो government का बता रहे थे कि by 2026 their target is 2 million digital merchants, 120 million online banking users, 15 billion digital transactions. And, you mentioned 400,000 transactions a month. That's maybe 5 million that you're doing. Maybe put all of the banks together and all of the gateways together. Maybe we can look at 100 million transactions. 15 billion, obviously, it just sounds like quite a number. And similarly, 2 million digital merchants and so on. I'm curious, are we looking at like a critical mass and a snowball effect where at a certain point, once everything is ready, it just sort of booms after that? In terms of, you mentioned सबसे जो बेसिक मेरे दिमाग में आती है वो तो एक ये चीज़ आती है कि यार मैं एक ई कॉमर्स का स्टोर हूँ, मैं आपके पास आऊँगा, आपकी एपीआईज़ इंटीग्रेट करूँगा, मेरे जब भी पेमेंट मुझे एग्जीक्यूट करनी होगी तो वो पीछे सेफ पे एसेंशियली लगा हुआ है और वो एग्जीक्यूट कर लेगा। लेकिन जब पेमेंट्स की बात आती है और ट्रूली अगर हमें डिजिटल सोसाइटी एक प्रॉपर बनानी है, तो आजकल तो धंधा अजीब डिफरेंट किस्म का हो रहा है, राइट? हर किस्म का बंदा है, ऑनलाइन ट्यूटर भी बैठा हुआ है या बैठी हुई है। ऑनलाइन जो है वो कोई कंसल्टिंग भी हो रही है, साइकोलॉजिस्ट जो है वो सेशन भी ले रही है। फिर ये है कि आई मीन सर्विसेज के हज़ार डिफरेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ हैं। um, एक पर्टिकुलर यूज़ केस मुझे नज़र आता है, आई डोंट नो व्हाई इट वाज नेवर प्रॉपर्ली डेवलप्ड, और मैं खुद पर्सनली मैंने दुबई में जाके देखा कि वहाँ पर वो किस तरीके से कर रहे हैं कि आपके पास अगर एक क्या कहते हैं उसे, कैश ऑन डिलीवरी वाला जब आता है तो ऑनलाइन वेबसाइट पे लोग नहीं पे करते। बड़ी सिंपल सा वो है कि ट्रस्ट का मसला है, ये है वो है। लेकिन एट द एंड ऑफ द डे कैश हैंडलिंग इज सच अ प्रॉब्लम। तो वो दुबई में यही होता है, कैश ऑन डिलीवरी भी आप करें या जैसे भी आप करें, तो वो रन टाइम पे जब बंदा आता है उस टाइम पे फ़ोन पे उसके या तो एनएफसी होता है या डायरेक्टली वो एक गेटवे उस पर डाल देता है। पाकिस्तान में क्या होना शुरू हुआ, मैं चीज़ें ऑर्डर करता था, कैश कहाँ होता है किसी के पास आजकल। वो बंदा आ जाता था, फिर वो हर दफ़ा उसके 2 चक्कर लगते थे। वो आता था, मैं कहता था, वो बेगम मुझे कॉल करती थी कि यार वो आइटम मंगवाया पैसे, मैं कहता नहीं है। फिर वो बंदे को वापस भेजा, वो अगले दिन आया कैश निकाल के। तो मैंने उसको बोलना शुरू किया, मैंने कहा यार बता कुछ कर सकता है वो। उसने ईज़ी पैसा शीज़ी पैसा करना शुरू किया। अब वो ईज़ी पैसा ज़ाहिर है उसको कैश आउट करने के पैसे लगते हैं, तो वो मेरे से ना आर्बिट्रेरली पैसे ले लेता था जी। 5,000 रुपये का पैकेज पार्सल है, 2 ढाई 300 रुपया उसके ऊपर ले लिया। है बस लाइक यार ये बंदा ईज़ी पैसा भी ले रहा है, इसके पास स्मार्टफोन भी है, इसने सारे ऑर्डर्स प्रोसेस भी उस पर करने हैं, उस पर इन्फॉर्मेशन भी डालनी है। तो कि ये गेटवे क्यों नहीं लगा सकता जो कि पीछे जो है ना इसके सिस्टम के साथ कनेक्टेड होगा, और वो अपना आईडी डालेगा, आईडी के साथ उसी वक्त मेरे से जो है ना पेमेंट रिसीव करेगा, और वो कह देगा जी पार्सल की पेमेंट हो गई है, और एक्चुअली टीसीएस को डायरेक्ट पैसे चला जाएंगे और टीसीएस आगे मर्चेंट को भी डायरेक्ट पैसे दे सकती है। जो कैश का मूवमेंट साइकिल है वो भी आसान हो जाता है। So there are a lot of these use cases. Even payments के अंदर, I mean, I understand you obviously want to diversify in terms of your products, but within payments, I feel like we've just touched like 0.1% of the industry right now. I'm curious, कि with or without RAAST, generally in terms of the product offering within payments, how much of that are you touching upon right now? How easy is it to onboard yourself? How much of that diversity are you working on? And then with RAAST, do you see some legitimate, exciting new changes that might happen? Can we begin to imagine कि अगले 1-2 साल के अंदर कोई ठेले वाला जो है वो एक क्यूआर लगा करके आम बेच रहा होगा, that's connected to his easy paisa account and the money is flowing there?
So I think if you look at it right now, the most pervasive form of accepting payments for a business digitally is credit or debit cards, right? That's something that everyone is used to. It's habitual. The only downside is that they're expensive. Or Pakistan is a very price sensitive market. So it's very difficult to convince your mass market or even the medium sized retailers to pay 2.9, 2.5%, जो भी कर करके आप negotiate नीचे कर दो. It's very difficult for them to convince them to do that, which has been one factor in the slow growth of e-commerce payments, at least. The second thing is what's known as merchant onboarding. So obviously financial institutions, when you're handling payments, highly regulated, aapko KYC karni hoti hai, you have to, screen your businesses, etc. Uske regulations were very stringent for PSPs like us, क्योंकि आपको वही कानून फॉलो करने होते हैं जो बैंक्स फॉलो करते हैं जब आप किसी बैंक के अंदर आप अकाउंट खोलने जाते हैं. So the industry and us together with it are lobbying the state bank and trying to convince them to lower the barrier to entry for a business to start accepting payments. Warna, like you said, the ठेले वाला जो आम बेचने जा रहा है वो कभी भी ऑन बोर्ड नहीं होगा, क्योंकि उसको पता नहीं है कि अपनी बैंक मेंटेनेंस
में अपनी मैंगो ट्रेडर्स इंक नहीं रजिस्टर कराएगा जाके.
उसने सॉरी यार सोल प्रोप्राइटरशिप नहीं की थी या उसकी बैंक मेंटेनेंस सर्टिफिकेट नहीं है, हम आपको ऑन बोर्ड नहीं कर सकते. आई मीन दैट्स अ बिट अनफेयर. यू हैव टू सी द मार्केट दैट यूर इन एंड उसके मुताबिक आपको लॉज बनाने हैं. ये नहीं कि आपने चले ये लॉज दुबई में हैं या यूके में आपने पढ़ी हैं, आपने वही छाप के यहाँ पाकिस्तान के लिए किया. You have to adapt your laws. So we're pushing for that. And the state bank also now has targets, like you mentioned, 2 million digital merchants, 16 billion transactions. So they need to get these new policies out the door very quickly. So so that's the second thing, right? Onboarding has been slow, and the first thing was it's very expensive. With RAAST, you get two things. One is you get instant, very cheap digital payments.
When you say very cheap, is that because the only is there a cost that you incur when you're making that payment? Or because my understanding was that State Bank was providing RAAST as a completely free rail to just move money, and then merchants can just add like a very small premium as per their own requirement and profitability and roll it out.
Yeah, so RAAST offers, currently it's free from the sense that they don't charge anything on top of the payment like Visa or Mastercard does, right? But whoever integrates into RAAST, or whoever wants to play with RAAST, unki infrastructure ki requirements are expensive. Right? आपको सर्वर रखने होते हैं, राउटर्स रखने होते हैं, फायरवॉल्स खरीदने होते हैं. You have to get direct internet connectivity to the state bank के servers, and आपको primary and backup sites रखनी होती हैं. That's where the expenses start. So
ये सारे आपको ऑन प्राइम करना होता है या आपको पाकिस्तान में होस्टेड क्लाउड भी चल सकता है?
पाकिस्तान में hosted होना ज़रूरी है for all of these things, which is actually more expensive than your international clouds.
No, that makes sense. But what I'm curious about is, उसमें पे pay as you grow की ऑप्शन आ जाती है ना, versus let's say on prem आपने पूरा डब्बा बना के रखना है, तो वो आपने अब प्रोजेक्ट करना है, आपने अभी खरीदना है कि अगर अगले 5 साल की ग्रोथ इतनी है तो अभी से डब्बा डाल दोगे उसके ऊपर, वो नहीं आता. On the other hand, cloud is still at least a bit more, you can sort of grow over time.
बिल्कुल हाँ. But for RAAS it's like आपको prod पर जाना है, आपको 8 routers तो खरीदने हैं, चलाओ नहीं चलाओ. That's a requirement based on their network architecture. So to cover all of those costs, the state bank has said, all right, you can charge a nominal amount as well. So it's not that हम 2.9 charge करेंगे, maybe 0.4% or something, which is more manageable or easy to digest for a business. कि अच्छा चलो यार 0.4% charge कर लिया, या 20 रुपए charge कर लिया, या जो भी. So you get that. And then, with the state bank, you can tell them कि यार, I'm going to try something in a controlled environment. सही है, मैं 1000 ठेले वाले जो let's say एक मार्केट में है, उनको जाके अप्रोच करूँगा और उनकी दुकानों पर मैं QR कोड्स चिपकाऊँगा. चाहे वो KYC हो ना हो, उनके पास इजी पैसे या जैज़ कैश तो होएगा ही होएगा. उनके साथ मैं पायलट शुरू करता हूँ. And then you grow from there, and then you grow from there. So the state bank is in a very, I would say, positive mood right now when it comes to digitization and facilitation and reaching these targets. Because agar aap RAAST as a rail, uski performance dekhein, in Q3, they did about 3.9 trillion rupees of payments. And that's P2P.
Interesting. So ये कंज्यूमर्स इस पे, मतलब एक तो हम सुन रहे थे ना स्टार्ट में वो एम्प्लॉयज़ की तनख्वाहें मूव करना शुरू करेंगे और वो सॉर्ट ऑफ B2C भी अगर जा रहा है तो वो बड़ा एक सॉर्ट ऑफ कंट्रोल तरीके से जा रहा था. अब आप ये कह रहे हैं, क्योंकि मेरे एक्सपीरियंस में बड़ा अजीब रहा है. मैंने एक्सपेक्ट किया था कि द विजन वाज कि रास्ट जो है वो आपको एक मोबाइल नंबर के साथ टाइड आपको एक वो दे देगा और आप बस मोबाइल नंबर डालें और बस पेमेंट चलेगी, आसान है. फिर वो देखा मैंने कि यार वो स्टैंडर्ड चार्टर्ड उसके ऊपर वो आना शुरू हुई कि रास्त आ गया ये वो. जब भी मैं उसके ऊपर क्लिक करता था वो कहता था जी दिस यूज़र इज़ नॉट रास्त रेडी, या ये मसला है कोई. I don't know, there was some weirdness always happening. Every time I tried to transfer through RAAST, it was always weird. And so I didn't think it's actually happening now.
So I think the state bank mandated all the banks and now all of us as well, every regulated entity, कि आपको RAAST support करना ही करना है. वरना आप वो फिर उनकी पेनल्टीज लग जाती हैं, ये लग जाता है एक्सेट्रा. तो एक तरह से उनकी तरह से डंडा था कि RAAST आया है, आपको करना है. So all the banks had to essentially fall in line and implement it. And if you think about it from their perspective, उनका एक product था IBFT, which was the precursor to RAAST, जिसके थ्रू हम एक दूसरे को पैसे भेजते थे. और अगर आपको याद होगा कि हर ट्रांसफ़र पर तकरीबन 20 रुपए लगते थे या 50 रुपए लगते थे. दैट वाज इनकम फॉर द बैंक. अब आप कह रहे हैं कि नहीं, आपको फ्री ट्रांसफ़र करना है, तो वो बैंक की इनकम गई. तो देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ रेजिस्टेंस फ्रॉम द बैंक्स अर्ली ऑन टू डू दिस, बट स्टेट बैंक ने कहा तो करना है. And now the same kind of resistance is coming on P2M, which is the commercial aspect of RAAST, कि यार हम ये भी free करेंगे तो हमारी तो ये acquiring payments की business बिल्कुल ही down हो जाएगी. So the entire industry now, and this is, it's a very interesting way. तो हम सब there are about like 3-4 WhatsApp groups. हम सब उन पर जा रहे हैं कि यार आप मुझे टेस्ट वाली पेमेंट भेजें, मैं आपको टेस्ट QR कोड भेजता हूँ, लेट्स ट्राई, आपस में टेस्टिंग चल रही है बहुत. एंड बट यू कैन टेल दैट देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ एक्साइटमेंट फॉर दीज काइंड्स ऑफ प्रोडक्ट्स इन द मार्केट टू कम आउट. तो RAAST हैज़ बिन प्रूवन टू बी एबल टू हैंडल द काइंड ऑफ वॉल्यूम दैट पीपल इन पाकिस्तान आर यूज्ड टू. एंड आई एम वेरी hopeful, but also at the same time I think confident that when P2M launches, it will drastically shift how people accept payments online. कि अगर आप अभी आप जाते हैं Shopify की वेबसाइट पर, अपना कार्ड नंबर डालते हैं, पेमेंट प्रोसेस हो जाती है. कल अगर SafePay या PayFast या जो भी Shopify का प्लगइन बनाता है जहाँ आपको सिर्फ अपनी IBAN डालनी होती है या फ़ोन नंबर डालना होता है, उसके थ्रू पेमेंट प्रोसेस हो जाए, then your behavior changes instantly.
और उसमें वो बेसिकली यही है कि आप अपना फ़ोन नंबर डालेंगे, आपको एक सॉर्ट ऑफ पिन कोड आएगा और आपने पेमेंट को अप्रूव करना है, या
आपको एक पुश नोटिफिकेशन आता है आपके बैंकिंग ऐप पर या नया पे, इजी पैसा, जो भी, आपको बस वो एक्सेप्ट करना होता है.
अच्छा, इंटरेस्टिंग. You again mentioned Web 3.0 and crypto, blockchain-based technologies. A lot of these sort of new age DeFi folks, the vision that they're working around is कि वो दो चीज़ों के अराउंड कहते हैं. वो कहते हैं यार, एक तो banks need to be disrupted because banking is what's the word for it? It's a predatory business, and it's a business जहाँ पर, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on a spot. I know these are your peers. But the general thought process is कि जो बैंक्स हैं वो सुकून में बैठ के कुछ ना करने के पैसे बनाते हैं, राइट? पाकिस्तान में अगर हम देखें तो लेंडिंग बिजनेस के अंदर वो गवर्नमेंट को पैसे दे के पैसे बनाते हैं. बाकी केसेस के अंदर जो है वो, they haven't necessarily been the most innovative in terms of actually growing the industry. It's been a big boys club where SME has no access to capital. Hascall takes 52 billion and then declares bankruptcy. There's no money available for private sector, but the government keeps on taking money, and banks की जो profitability है, it's through the roof. Similarly, Visa, Mastercard have a monopoly, and so पैसा तो मूव करना है. अब आप जैसे 50 करोड़ प्लेयर्स पूरी दुनिया में एग्जिस्ट करते हैं जो कि पीनट्स पे, चिल्लड़ पे चल रहे हैं, और वीज़ा मास्टरकार्ड जो है वो कुछ ना करने के, जस्ट बिकॉज दे हैव द रेल्स, नोबडी कैन चैलेंज देम, तो वो उस पर कर रहे हैं. ऑब्वियसली इंटरनली, लोकली, RAAST is what disrupts that essentially, and I think the vision for RAAST I can begin to understand because I actually had the opportunity to go to Russia a couple of times last year, and Russia, as you know, has been sanctioned. There's no Visa Mastercard there, so the minute we sort of landed, they gave us this local bank card, and I was surprised because the local payment system is just incredible and it's super robust. And that's where, जब आप, वैसे तो आप ज़्यादा सोचते नहीं हैं, लेकिन जब आपको पता लगता है कि यार इस मुल्क में वीज़ा मास्टरकार्ड ही नहीं है तो क्या है, तो फिर आप थोड़ा सा उसका इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को दिमाग में बनाते हैं कि अच्छा, एक्चुअली वो मैसेजिंग यूँ हो रही है और फिर वो लोकली इस तरह हो रही है, बट सिर्फ लोकली नहीं हो रही, एक्चुअली वो चाइना वाला जो कार्ड है वो भी चल रहा है, तो सिर्फ हम वीज़ा मास्टरकार्ड वाले हम फंसे हुए हैं, तो अच्छा क्रॉस बॉर्डर भी हो रहा है, बट वो किस तरह हो रहा है. सो एक तो आपको ये नज़र आ रहा है कि यार स्टेट बैंक लेवल के ऊपर आपके पास डिफरेंट डिफरेंट कंट्रीज़ के अपने मैसेजिंग सिस्टम स्टार्ट हो गए हैं और वो theoretically they can begin to connect with each other and at least regionally we can then bypass this sort of monopoly because central banks are not necessarily very interested in making money out of this thing, right? They're more interested in looking at your transactions and making sure they're happening digitally. So if they even begin to talk to each other, they can at least you know that the cost side is going to be covered. दूसरा ऑब्वियसली उसका तरीक़ाकार ये जो कि ग्रैंड विजन था, जो इजी पैसा ने एक ज़माने में, मुझे याद है माई ब्रदर इन लॉ वाज वर्किंग देयर, तो दे हैड दैट विजन कि उन्होंने पहली क्रॉस बॉर्डर पेमेंट ब्लॉकचेन बेस्ड की थी और you have these transactions that are happening that are verifiable and efficient and so on. I'm curious, when you look at the world of blockchain, एक तो ज़ाहिर है कि पाकिस्तान में क्रिप्टो आ रही है, तो एक तो यूज़ केस बेस्ड बंदा ये कहता है ना कि यार ठीक है, ओके पेमेंट्स हैं, पेमेंट्स फॉर क्रिप्टो हम कर रहे हैं या पेमेंट्स थ्रू क्रिप्टो वो हम कर रहे हैं, बट generally how do you see the technology, how do you see the future of that technology, and how do you see then the future of payments? Because now we're in a very interesting and disruptive cycle, and that's not just in the cycle of digital payments and digitization, but also in terms of the financial system. As a lot of people are saying, we're in a reset, the 1973 or the 1948 reset, and so that's going to fundamentally change how a lot of this works, because there's a lot of geopolitics there, there's Swift there, there's Visa, Mastercard there, and that a lot of that is being disrupted. So obviously you being a central node for that, for a country like Pakistan where it's just sort of starting, what's your opinion on how you see the evolution over the next, let's say, medium and long term, medium being, let's say, 5 to 10 year timeline, and then long being a 20-25 year timeline?
So I think we're at an interesting place now where the speed of progress in this country, if everything, stays the way it is right now, is going to increase. And I'm pretty bullish on things in Pakistan because you have a lot of things that are the right ingredients at the right time. तो आपकी government चाहती है कि digitization आगे बढ़े. That directly affects the state bank and their policies. When the state bank becomes easier to work with, you get a lot more fintechs that come up with interesting ideas to propose to the state bank, etc. So there's generally a lot more activity. The second thing is Pakistan's obviously now very digitized in the sense कि सबके पास smartphone है or internet है, so they know कि दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है. And because उनको पता है कि दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है, there's an understanding कि यार मुझे वही चीज़ यहाँ मेरे मुल्क में चाहिए. So या तो someone will come and provide it for them or they'll build it themselves. So if you look at it from the perspective of our industry, it will be probably one of the slower ones to progress just because it's regulated and the state bank is, tends to be risk averse. But as long as there are companies like us who can build new things and new use cases and show the state bank and educate them कि ये दुनिया में हो रहा है, ये ऐसे हमारे मुल्क में हो सकता है और हमारे मुल्क को ये benefit कर सकता है. And if you're able to show that to them, then they're more likely to give you some sort of approval or pilot or sandbox or something like that. And then उसके through आप, निकल सकते हैं. तो अगर आप, let's say you ask for an arm, आपको 4 उंगलियां या 2 उंगलियां मिल जाती है. And then आप वहाँ से you can go forward. So from our perspective, it's के how can we continue to see what's happening in the rest of the world and draw parallels to what can be done in Pakistan. अब सब कुछ तो नहीं हो सकता. Obviously, we know that. Pakistan will take its time. But I think that time is now going to decrease and decrease. So, like you mentioned, we, हमारे पास RAAST आया था after, obviously, UPI in India, after PIX in Brazil. But अगर आप उन दोनों मुल्क की trajectories देखें, from the introduction of those two pieces of infrastructure, their respective countries have changed course. And I think that can happen for Pakistan as well with RAAST, is if obviously the ecosystem around it plays its part. अब state bank और the government, they've done their bit, right? उन्होंने कहा था कि हमने ये infrastructure आपके लिए खड़ा कर दिया है. अब आपकी जिम्मेदारी है as a bank or as a PSP or an EMI to take advantage of this and build the interesting use cases and give it to the market. Because there are these fintechs, because we like the technology and we like finance, etc., we will take advantage of this and build these interesting use cases and put them out into the market and distribute them to people. So I think that cycle will continue to happen and it'll continue to increase. And now what we're seeing is that globally, the stance of crypto as a technology and as a payment rail itself, uski I don't know the right word is, but basically the way people think about it is changing as well. No? And if you look at the US as the government or the model to follow, they just have started to regulate it and pass policies around it. Genius Act and ye sab pass hui thi and etc. So the world is warming up. Aapke institutions are investing in it and etc. And Pakistan is always kind of, don't get me wrong, we're the fifth largest by volume in when it comes to crypto. So people know what cryptocurrency is over here and how to kind of use it, but it's always been in the gray area कि आपने यार Binance की P2P पर आपने किसी को IBFT कर दिया और उसने आपके stable coin wallet में 1,000 USDC deposit कर लिया. There's no formal way of doing it. And that's prevented a lot of people in Pakistan from benefiting from the immense rise in value of some of the core cryptocurrencies in the world, right? अगर आप Bitcoin को ले लें या Ethereum को ले लें, Bitcoin 2008 में शुरू हुआ है, तकरीबन चलो, it's been about 15 years, maybe give or take 17 years. 17 years it's gone from zero to $110,000. The amount of people in the West, or maybe some in the Far East as well, who benefited from that growth in value versus the number of people in Pakistan that benefited from growth of value is crazy, right? Why couldn't Pakistanis benefit from it? In my opinion, that's unfair. I think that getting access to these new technologies, while they're new, while they're a bit scary, कि आप ये कर सकते हैं, आप किसी को भी पैसे भेज सकते हैं, there are a lot of bad things that can happen with this, but there are a lot of good things. And being able to give average people in Pakistan who understand this technology or are curious about it, the ability to gain exposure to it, I think is immensely powerful. Like you said, Pakistanis don't have access, SMEs don't have access to capital in this country, but large companies do. This has the power to democratize some of the lending that can happen. You can invest more easily in global markets through stable coins and crypto. You can also, and now you're talking about the future, ना, आप 10 साल की जो बात कर रहे थे, आप यहाँ आप tokenization ला सकते हैं ना, जो आपके physical assets जो है, let's say real estate or something, आप उनको tokenize कर सकते हैं. You can have fractional ownership in property जो today it doesn't exist. आप देख लें कराची में जो आप कह रहे थे कि 20 करोड़ के जो plots होते हैं, those you can distribute and fractionally own them, give people access to new kinds of investment opportunities that don't exist over here. And this isn't just like the lower middle class, it's all classes everywhere. There is no concept over here, in my opinion, of investing in digital assets as it is in the US. Today, I know that if my dad or my mom wants to invest in a company on the Pakistan Stock Exchange, वो फ़ोन उठा के अपने ब्रोकर को फ़ोन करेंगे कि यार क्या लगता है, करूँ ना करूँ, कितना करूँ, इंस्टेड के यार आपके स्मार्टफोन खोलें, आप खुद पढ़ लें, या maybe there's a AI chat GPT built into it that you can talk to. वो नहीं हो रहा. And I think that really needs to happen in this country for people to grow for themselves.
मेक सेंस. मुझे बताइए, जो आपकी लास्ट क्वेश्चन ऑन दिस, बट आपकी जो मर्चेंट ऑन बोर्डिंग है, इज दैट लाइक अ रिएक्टिव और अ प्रोएक्टिव थिंग इन द सेंस दैट if I have a company and I send you my documentation today and I say okay, again मैं स्ट्राइप पे जाता हूँ, तो वो मेरे से ट्रेड लाइसेंस मांगता है, दुबई में अगर मैं हूँ ट्रेड लाइसेंस मांगता है, मेरी इन्फॉर्मेशन लेता है, मेरा वीज़ा स्टेटस वगैरह, रेजिडेंसी स्टेटस लेता है, पाकिस्तानी केस में ID कार्ड होगा, और वो कहता है जी ठीक है आप अप्लाई कर दें, और आई थिंक विद इन एन आवर एज लॉन्ग एज ऑल ऑफ माई डॉक्यूमेंट्स आर अप टू डेट, वो मुझे ओके कर देता है. और वो ऑटोनमस उसका लगा होता है कि वो इमेज रिकग्निशन के थ्रू चेक कर लेता है कि यार इसकी डेट ऑफ एक्सपायरी क्या है, तो वो उसके टाइमली मुझे नोटिफाई कर देता है जब मेरा एक्सपायरी आ रही होती है. पाकिस्तान में आप अगर ब्रोकर अकाउंट खोलने जाते हैं, कुछ भी करने जाते हैं, तो इट्स लाइक अ वीक लॉन्ग, आई डोंट नो व्हाट. वो जो मेरी ब्रोकर से बात हुई, वो कहते हैं कि जी पीछे जो एटलीस्ट स्टॉक ब्रोकर्स वाला है, वो कौन सी CCP कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है दैट हैज़ टू अप्रूव एवरीबडी, एंड वो कहते हैं जी वो रिप्लाई नहीं करते, तो अब हम क्या करें, राइट. वो बात ख्वाब है कि 4 लाख इन्वेस्टर्स से हमने 40 लाख पे जाना है, बट अगर एक बंदा मैन्युअली बैठा हुआ है ओके 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 कर रहा है, तो 40 लाख पे तो नहीं आप जा सकते. यू हैव टू हैव लाइक एन ऑटोनमस सिस्टम, एंड यू हैव टू हैव लाइक एटलीस्ट a reactive a system where, for example, you can onboard people as long as you are making sure कि आप KYC करके अपने पास रख रहे हैं, then the state bank can come in once a year, twice a year, thrice a year, randomly if they want, and they can audit you to make sure you're compliant. So compliance based system. I'm curious, आप लोगों का compliance based है या आप लोगों को हर चीज़ हर दफ़ा हर इंडिविजुअल को जाके वेट करवाना पड़ता है किसी सिस्टम से कि यार ये legit है कि नहीं?
It's हर दफ़ा हमें जाके verify करना पड़ता है, and it's slow, it's problematic. इसलिए हमारे पास, we're not at the scale that we want to be at, where we're serving, thousands of merchants. It's because कि अभी फ़िलहाल payment gateway businesses के लिए, या let's say अगर आप merchant है, आपको online payments accept करनी है, उसकी KYC is still very very detailed. एक तो ये है कि यार आपने वही KYC बैंक अकाउंट खोलने में करी, सही है, आपने अपने SCCP के डॉक्यूमेंट्स निकाले, आपने CNICs निकाले, सब कुछ निकाले, फिर यार आपको वही KYC दोबारा करनी होती है. It doesn't make sense. And that's it. Not only that, the merchant or the business will say कि यार छोड़ो यार, मतलब मैं तो बैंक ट्रांसफर I'll take that, उसमें तो कोई KYC नहीं है. So we're working with the state bank to do this. In an ideal situation, what we would expect is that कि अगर एक business की उसकी business bank account is in a good standing, it's active, it's working, etc., then उसका मतलब यह है कि जो बैंक है उसने KYC परफॉर्म की है और वो ongoing KYC परफॉर्म कर रहा है. So that should be one enough for us. And then the second thing is कि हम उसके identity documents के against उसकी जो भी sanction screening करनी है with various different lists, वो हम automate कर सकते हैं, which we already do today. So we want to really cut that time down and really do something similar to what Stripe is doing, where it's self-service. आप जाएं, आप DIY do it yourself करके अपनी डिटेल्स जो भी हैं अपलोड कर लें. We will give you as much information as possible कि बैंक मेंटेनेंस सर्टिफिकेट क्या होती है, कहाँ से आपको लेनी है, कैसे आप रिक्वेस्ट करते हैं, बट अल्टीमेटली आप खुद कर लें, इंशाल्लाह 1 घंटे में आपको आंसर मिल जाएगा.
I had a few other questions, but actually at the 2 hour 11-minute mark, and I want to wrap this up.
Oh, wow.
But this I'll be honest, up till now this has been one of my most favorite conversations. There's a lot of exciting stuff that you guys are doing, and I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, hope that some of these issues that I've been hearing about over the last 4 years begin to get resolved. At least there is a regime right now, जो finance की regime है, that at least is saying all the right things. They're saying we're export focused. They're saying we're not we want to digitize, and एटलीस्ट आवाज़ ऐसी आ रही है कि सीमिंगली शायद वेर हेडेड इन द राइट डायरेक्शन. जो आपने थोड़ी देर पहले बात बोली कि यार स्टेट बैंक थोड़ा स्लो रहता है, लेकिन ये कि ओवर टाइम अब वो आ रहा है, सो वे गोना लैग बिहाइंड. प्राइस ओए के जो फाउंडर हैं अदनान शफी, ही वाज हियर ऑन द पॉडकास्ट रिसेंटली एंड ही सेड समथिंग वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एंड प्रोफाउंड. बिकॉज ही इज़ अ डेटा गाय, सो ही रियली स्टडीज़ एंड ही सेड कि जी मैंने अपनी कुछ स्टार्टअप भी इसी तरह बनाई कि मैंने स्टडी किया कि डिफरेंट इकोनॉमीज़ में किस तरीके से डिफरेंट स्टार्टअप्स इमर्ज किए हैं. तो उन्होंने कहा कि जी फेजेस में आते हैं. सबसे पहले फिनटेक आता है, फिनटेक आके सबसे पहले वो रेल्स प्रोवाइड करता है कि पेमेंट होगी तो बिजनेस बिल्ड होगा. बिजनेस जो है वो पहले नहीं बन सकता और पेमेंट्स बाद में नहीं आ सकती. आई थिंक हमारा जो मसाइल थे उसको आहिस्ता आहिस्ता, जो मैं एटलीस्ट समझा हूँ कि पिछले 4 साल मैं सुनता रहा लोगों से, तो लोगों के बस बहुत सारे ओपिनियंस थे, बट एक्चुअली मसला पेमेंट्स का ही था, मसला रास्त का ही था, मसला आपका एक बहुत प्रिमिटिव सिस्टम पड़ा हुआ था जो कि कंड्यूसिव ही नहीं था टू द स्केल दैट वाज जिसके सब ख्वाब देख रहे थे. सो पेमेंट्स आई फील लाइक इज़ नाउ बिगिनिंग टू गेट फिक्स्ड एंड इट्स ओनली अ मैटर ऑफ टाइम, जिसमें जो थोड़े बहुत क्वर्क्स हैं वो भी वन वे और द अदर सॉर्ट आउट हो जाएंगे. आई डू होप दैट स्टेट बैंक कैन एक्चुअली मेक इट अ बिट मोर ईजियर. ऑन बोर्डिंग थोड़ा सा आसान करते हैं. ऑन बोर्डिंग आई थिंक इज़ द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम राइट नाउ. बट आई थिंक उसके बाद थिंग्स आर गोना हैपन वेरी वेरी रैपिडली, बिकॉज वंस द बेस इज़ देयर देन उसके ऊपर वो उन्होंने ये कहा था कि जी उसके बाद ई कॉमर्स आता है, फिर सोशल कॉमर्स आता है, फिर सर्विसेज की पूरी स्पेस आती है. एंड आई थिंक वो चीज़, वो जो एवोल्यूशन है ना, वो फिर उस हिसाब से रैपिड होती जाएगी. देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ ऑप्टिमिज्म टू गो बाय in terms of the potential of Pakistan. I'm curious, conversation हमने जब start की थी, we spent a lot of time and I asked you really कि what brought you back to Pakistan, right? I think एक स्टार्टअप की ज़िंदगी में, and आपने भी बोला कि मल्टीपल टाइम्स ऐसे आए जब हमने सोचा कि यार यू नो व्हाट, लाइक मिस कराओ निकलते हैं. एक मेच्योरिटी का पीरियड डेफिनेटली आता है जिसमें वो कहता है कि यार अच्छा ठीक है, अब दिस इज़ आई एम नाउ मैरिड टू दिस थिंग एंड आई सी इट थ्रू. एंड आई फील लाइक पर्सनली आई कैन सी दैट मेच्योरिटी, नॉट मे बी इन द बिजनेस, अभी तो बहुत ग्रोथ बाकी है, बट इन टर्म्स ऑफ द बिजनेस आइडिया एंड द वैलिडेशन कि भाई ये है और ये लेजिट है और इसमें हमने आगे जाना है. Obviously that brought you out here back to Pakistan as well, after almost a decade. And as you've gone through your own ups and downs and probably the worst political and economic sort of turmoil that Pakistan has seen in at least recent history, if not all of history, um, there's a lot of insight that one generates when they're sitting in your seat and wearing your shoes. And I'm curious, extrapolating that particular insight to the next 25 years, how do you see Pakistan of 2050, knowing what you know now and seeing what you've seen throughout your life, with this caveat that I don't want an answer of if the government does this and if the people do that, but rather just taking whatever you have today, taking in whatever your thoughts are today, and then really just sort of extrapolating that to 25 years from now. What do you see Pakistan looking like in 2050?
I think it's again, I'll caveat this with no one can really predict what's going to happen, but Karachi will definitely become bigger, a bit more chaotic, in my opinion. I think that's a very difficult problem to fix. But two things. One is on the infrastructure side, we'll have to obviously invest a lot in infrastructure. So I'm hoping that by 2050, that improves. Otherwise, we won't really be in a good position. And I think technology is something that we have to adopt more seriously. And tied to technology adoption is education adoption needs to become more important. So I think, and a lot of these things have become much more accessible, right? With AI and all of these kinds of things that you can now study about anything you want to. So my hope is that by the time that, we're at that age, 2050 it'll put me at 60 or something.
60.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that what we've been able to do in our productive years can really set the stage for, similar to how Pakistan was during the years after independence, where we were again, like the model nation for countries like South Korea and stuff, where we had people from Singapore and Malaysia coming to Pakistan to see, and, how have you set up your factories and how have you done your things? So I think, we should hopefully become examples to other countries, maybe not the South Koreas, they'll obviously be further ahead, but to the GCC, to maybe, neighboring countries like the stands that are above us, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, all of these kinds of countries, Kazakhstan, etc. Maybe we can be model countries to them. And I think that's really, really my hope, is that we all kind of pick ourselves up, because we've always had a problem of relying on others to help us out, whether it's through, foreign loans or foreign aid or foreign something or the others, like even technology के यार PayPal हमारे पास नहीं है, या Stripe हमारे क्यों नहीं है, वो क्यों नहीं आ रहे हैं. It's like we need to learn to stand on our own 2 feet and build things for ourselves. And if we don't help ourselves, no one will help us. So I really hope that mentality starts getting more widely adopted. So yeah, I mean, I'm bullish on Pakistan. Like I'm here essentially. I think like we in Pakistan, we're in like a unique position where, I mean, this is the only country that we'll be a first-class citizen in, essentially, right? So if you want to do something in a country, do it here. You have a lot more opportunity here. You have a lot more contacts here. People are encouraging you to do things. So I think the more and more people focus their energies on building for this country, from a private sector perspective, I'm not saying public sector, the more successful it'll be. You don't need the government to always do things. I think the government just kind of sets the tone and tries to keep, like एक train चल रही है, उसको बस एक पटरी पर चलने दो, just don't rock it too hard. And let the people on the train just build things or do things and make their own life in this country. And we'll eventually get there. Like you said, there are a lot of startups. We've had probably the most number of new companies being registered in SECP in the last 5 years than we did throughout that entire maybe 2000s decade. So there's activity happening. People are young. People want to grow and they're ambitious again. So inshallah, I think we have a bright future ahead.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all that insight. I wish you all the very best. I'm excited to see where Safepay goes from here. And yeah, I would love to actually use one of your service. I don't know if it's just like a payment gateway for the website, or do you have like a Stripe sort of a situation where people who provide services can actually create checkout pages and stuff like that as well. But if you have anything like that, I'd love to collaborate and use that and see kaisa experience hai. But wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all that insight.
Thank you so much, Muzamil. Pleasure being on your show.
And for all of you guys, let me know in the comment section below, have you been using any payment gateway जो e-commerce वाले लोग हैं, जो different even small and medium businesses चला रहे हैं. बहुत सारे again मैं लोगों को जानता हूँ जो कि हर कोई ना पाकिस्तान में कोई ना कोई धंधा ज़रूर कर रहा है. नौकरी भी कर रहा है तो साथ कोई ना कोई काम कर रहा है, कोई ट्यूशन पढ़ा रहा है. बड़े इनोवेटिव काम कर रहे हैं इनफैक्ट लोग अब बैठ के. और वो जो है वो एक दूसरे को हेल्प आउट कर रहे हैं. ज़ाहिर है जहाँ जहाँ से वो पैसे निकाल सकते हैं. अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स वो सारा का सारा धंधा जो है वो बैंक उस पर चल रहा होता है कि यार इधर बैंक ट्रांसफ़र कर दो, इधर कैश इस तरह से कर दो. दैट्स कॉम्प्लिकेटेड. देयर इज़ नॉट अ लॉट ऑफ रिपोर्टिंग बीइंग डन. वो चीज़ें सारी की सारी रैंडम होती हैं. साल के आखिर में अगर आपको टैक्स फाइल करना पड़ जाए तो उसमें फिर आपको पता ही नहीं लगता कि यार कहाँ जा रहा हूँ मैं, क्या चल रहा है, पेमेंट किसने किधर की थी, क्या कहाँ से आई थी. तो जनरली भी मेरी रिकमेंडेशन ही सबसे होगी कि अब गवर्नमेंट भी अब थोड़ा सीरियस होना शुरू हो गई है. तो अगर आप टैक्स फाइल नहीं करते तो ज़रूर टैक्स फाइल करें. अगर आप कोई धंधा कर रहे हैं बियॉन्ड योर जॉब तो आई वुड रेकमेंड कि जी कंपनी रजिस्टर कराएं. एक्चुअली आपकी टैक्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन में भी ये बड़ा यूज़फुल होता है, क्योंकि आप काफ़ी दफ़ा अगर सिर्फ अपने पर्सनल बैंक अकाउंट में पैसे लेकर आ रहे होते हैं तो फिर टैक्स आपका नेट पे लगता है. अगर आप कंपनी रजिस्टर करा के लीगली फॉर्मली फिर उस कंपनी में अपना रेवेन्यू सारा लेकर आते हैं, उसमें फिर आप कॉस्ट्स को निकाल के सिर्फ अपने प्रॉफिट को टैक्सेबल बना सकते हैं, तो देयर इज़ एक्चुअली टैक्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन के लिए भी इट्स गुड. थोड़ा सा पाकिस्तान में ज़ाहिर है हमें ख्वारी लगती है, समझ नहीं आती, बट इतना कोई कॉम्प्लिकेटेड नहीं है. गेट लाइक अ टैक्स लाइक जेनेरिक लॉयर 5, 8, 6, 10 हज़ार रुपये में वो आपकी SCCP में एक कंपनी खोल लेगा. वो कंपनी पूरी ज़िंदगी पड़ी रहेगी. अब दुबई वगैरह की लोग बातें करते हैं, वहाँ पे हर साल आपको 10-12 हज़ार दिरहम देना पड़ता है उस कंपनी को चलाने का. पाकिस्तान में तो एक दफ़ा रजिस्टर हो गई तो डॉक्यूमेंट आपके हाथ में. Once you have that, then things become much easier. It's a slight barrier to entry, थोड़ी सी ख्वारी है, लेकिन उसके बाद जो आपकी opportunities खुलती हैं, once you're able to then get on board payment gateways like Safepay, then you can do a bunch of other things because you're a tax filer, because you have a proper legal registered company. There's a lot that you can do. So I would definitely recommend for those who aren't doing it, for those who already are, would love to know your experience with different payment gateways. We've spoken about a lot of things about the evolution of the industry over the last 3-4 years. How has your experience been? Let me know in the comment section below. But nonetheless, it was Muzamil Hasan Zedi. You're watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.